Roman gladiators were not just fighters in the sand. They were prisoners, performers, celebrities, outcasts, and symbols of everything Rome feared about itself. To understand them, we must look beyond the sword, beyond the helmet, and beyond the roar of the crowd into the Roman world that created the arena, filled it with human bodies, and then called it entertainment. Before there was a Colosseum, before there were marble seats packed with shouting spectators, before emperors could win public love by giving Rome a day of blood and spectacle, there was something older and quieter. There was death, there was mourning. There was the belief that the dead deserved gifts, honor, ceremony, and perhaps even blood. The story of the gladiator begins not with entertainment but with memory. In the earliest Roman world, long before the empire stretched across deserts, forests, islands, and seas, Rome was still learning how to become Rome. It was a city of farmers, soldiers, fathers, households, gods, grave, and ancestral names. Power lived inside families, honor lived inside memory. A noble Roman did not simply die and vanish. He passed into the world of ancestors, and those still living were expected to honor him properly. Funerals for the powerful were not small private moments. They could become public displays of rank, family pride, political ambition, and social memory. The dead were carried through the streets. Ancestors were remembered. The living watched. The family name was lifted again before the eyes of the city. And somewhere in this older world, men began to fight as part of funeral ceremony. The meaning is debated and the details are not always clear, but many ancient writers and later historians connected the earliest gladiatorial contests with funeral rites, where combat and blood were offered in honor of the dead. It was not yet the huge machine of imperial spectacle. It was not yet the full arena culture of Rome. It was something more severe, more intimate, and in some ways more disturbing. The living body of one man placed in danger to honor the memory of another. This is where the gladiator first appears, not as a movie hero, not as a free warrior chasing glory, but as a figure standing between ritual and violence. Rome did not invent violence. No ancient society did. But Rome became unusually skilled at organizing it, naming it, staging it, and giving it meaning. What began as a funeral offering slowly became a public event. What began around memory became connected to status. What began as blood for the dead became entertainment for the living. This change did not happen in one day. It unfolded slowly as Rome itself changed. At first, Rome was only one city among others in Italy. Around it were different peoples, languages, customs, enemies, allies, and older cultures. Rome borrowed, absorbed, resisted, and transformed what it touched. From its neighbors it took religious ideas, military methods, symbols of power, and forms of display. The Romans were not embarrassed by borrowing. They were masters at taking something foreign and making it Roman. The gladiatorial contest likely emerged from this mixture of Italian and Mediterranean customs, shaped by Roman values of courage, discipline, public honor, and domination over death. The Romans watched combat and saw more than violence. They saw endurance. They saw self-control. They saw the body tested under pressure. They saw fear exposed. They saw a man forced to show whether he could remain steady when every eye was upon him. That detail matters. Because the gladiator was not admired only for killing. He was admired for how he behaved when fear should have broken him. Roman culture cared deeply about composure. The ideal Roman man was supposed to endure pain, master emotion, control his body, and accept fate with dignity. Of course, real Romans were human. They panicked, grieved, envied, lied, failed, and feared like anyone else. But the public ideal remained powerful. Courage under pressure became a kind of performance. The battlefield demanded it, the Senate admired it, the household taught it, the arena displayed it. The gladiator, even when socially despised, became a living image of this Roman obsession. He stood where no ordinary citizen wanted to stand. He faced injury, shame, and death in public. He was trained to move with discipline, to accept wounds without chaos, to obey the rules of a violent performance, and to make fear visible without surrendering to it. That was part of the terrible fascination. Rome watched the gladiator because he represented both the lowest and the highest things in Roman imagination. He could be enslaved, condemned, bought, sold, branded, and controlled. Yet in the moment of combat, he might also show courage that free men claim to value. He might be legally degraded, yet emotionally admired. He might be beneath society, yet lifted into fame by the crowd. The contradiction was never fully resolved. It was part of what made the arena so powerful. If these quiet journeys through the ancient world help you relax, you can stay with this channel as we continue building a calm library of empires, cities, rulers, battles, and forgotten lives. For now, let the noise of the present fade and step slowly into the older world that created the gladiator. In the early centuries of Rome, violence was never far away. The city grew through war, alliance, pressure, and expansion. Its citizens were soldiers. Its politics were shaped by military reputation. Its aristocrats won honor by commanding armies, capturing towns, defeating rivals, and returning home with spoils. The Roman world was built around the idea that public greatness required struggle. A Roman nobleman did not simply want to be rich. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted his name carved into the long memory of the city. He wanted people to know what offices he held, what enemies he defeated, what buildings he funded, what games he gave, and what honors followed his family. This hunger for memory fed the growth of spectacle. A man who gave games could display generosity. He could show wealth, he could honor the dead, he could please the people, he could compete with other powerful families. He could make his name echo in the streets. And the more Rome grew, the more public entertainment became part of political life. The gladiator was drawn into this world. At first, contests were relatively small compared with what came later. A few pairs of fighters might be shown at a funeral. They fought before an audience that understood the event as part ceremony, part honor, part display. But over time, numbers increased. Ambitious men offered larger spectacles. Crowds expected more. The connection between funeral ritual and political competition became stronger. What had once belonged to mourning began to belong to public ambition. This is one of the quiet patterns of Roman history. A custom begins with religious or social meaning. Then wealth enters it. Then rivalry enters it. Then the state enters it. Then architecture grows around it. Then an entire profession forms around what was once a ritual. The gladiator became part of a system. He required training, he required equipment, he required management, he required rules, he required places to fight, he required people who could buy, sell, feed, guard, discipline, and display him. Once this system existed, it could expand, and Rome was very good at expansion. As the Republic grew, wars brought captives. Conquests brought wealth, victories brought triumphs. Foreign peoples entered Roman imagination not only as enemies, but as types, costumes, weapons, and symbols. The arena could turn the defeated world into performance. A man dressed and armed in a certain style might suggest a conquered people, a remembered enemy, or a foreign danger now mastered by Rome. This is why gladiators were not all armed in the same way. The arena loved contrast, heavy against light, shield against net, helmet against speed, sword against trident, strength against agility, patience against sudden movement. The fight was not merely two men hacking at each other. It was arranged to create tension. The equipment shaped the story of the duel. A heavily armored fighter might move with protection but less speed. A lighter fighter might depend on distance, timing, and nerve. A shield could save a man but also slow him. A net could trap an opponent but leave its wielder exposed if thrown badly. Every weapon created possibility. Every weakness created suspense. The Romans did not simply want death, they wanted drama. This is important for understanding the gladiator clearly. The crowd came to watch danger, skill, courage, pain, and uncertainty. A quick, clumsy death could disappoint them. A good fight had rhythm, it had pursuit and escape. It had moments where one man seemed finished, then recovered. It had visible skill. It had discipline. It had the feeling that the outcome was still undecided. The gladiator had to survive not only his opponent but the expectations of performance. He trained for combat but also for display. He had to move in a way that could be read from a distance. He had to show courage before thousands. He had to understand when to press forward, when to hold back, when to make a fight worth watching, and when to preserve his own life. Behind the spectacle was hard routine. The training school or ludus was not a place of freedom. It was a controlled world of discipline, food, weapons, hierarchy, punishment, and repetition. Some men entered as slaves, some as prisoners, some as condemned criminals. Some, surprisingly, entered voluntarily under contract, accepting disgrace and danger for money, debt relief, fame, or the hope of a different life. That fact may feel strange at first. Why would a free man choose the arena? But ancient societies did not give everyone the same choices. Debt could close around a man. Poverty could narrow the future. A failed life could make risk appear attractive. Fame could tempt the desperate. The arena was dangerous, humiliating, and socially degrading, but it also offered food, shelter, training, and the possibility, however uncertain, of money or recognition. A man who had little might gamble with the only thing left to him, his body. Inside the ludus, the gladiator's life was shaped by routine. He trained under instructors, often former gladiators who understood the craft. Wooden weapons might be used for practice. Movements were repeated until they became memory. The body was hardened and controlled. Meals were provided to build strength. Wounds were treated because a trained fighter was valuable property. Discipline was strict because fear and disorder could ruin the school. The Lannister, the manager and trainer who owned or leased gladiators, occupied a morally uneasy place in Roman society. He dealt in bodies, he profited from danger, he trained men for public violence. Wealth could pass through his hands, but respect did not always follow. Like many parts of Roman entertainment, the arena produced fame without honor, money without purity, admiration without equality. The gladiator shared this contradiction. Romans could cheer him, desire him, paint him on walls, scratch his name into surfaces, and remember his victories. Yet they could also look down on him. He belonged to a class marked by infamy. His body was public, his violence was hired. His life could be negotiated by others. He was admired and degraded at the same time. That is one of the deepest truths of the gladiator. He was never just a warrior. He was a mirror held up to Roman society, showing how easily a culture could turn human danger into public pleasure and then decorate it with rules, ceremony, and applause. As Rome moved from republic toward empire, the scale of spectacle grew. Political competition became more intense. Public games became larger. The people expected gifts from ambitious leaders. Grain festivals, theatre, races, hunts, executions, and gladiatorial contests all became part of the relationship between power and crowd. A Roman politician understood that the people did not live by law and speeches alone. They lived in bodies. They felt hunger, heat, boredom, resentment, loyalty, and excitement. A man who gave them spectacle could become memorable. He could seem generous. He could make the city feel alive. He could buy attention if not love. In this world, the arena became political language. A grand display said, "I am wealthy enough to give this. I am powerful enough to organize this. I respect tradition. I honor the gods. I honor the dead. I entertain the people. I command men, animals, space, and danger. Remember my name." The crowd understood. The gladiator stood at the center of that message, but he did not own it. His courage belonged to another man's ambition. His wounds became part of another man's reputation. His survival could make the crowd roar, but the event itself served powers far above him. Still, within that narrow and dangerous world, gladiators could create identities of their own. Some became known for particular weapons, some for style, some for endurance, some for beauty, some for repeated survival. Names mattered, victories mattered. The crowd could develop favorites. A gladiator who fought well might earn admiration even from those who considered him socially inferior. Inscriptions and graffiti from the Roman world remind us that spectators did not see gladiators as anonymous bodies. They watched, judged, remembered, and chose. There were stars in the arena, but fame in Rome was not safety. A famous gladiator could still die, a skilled fighter could still slip, a strong man could still bleed into the sand, a crowd that loved him could still demand more. The very thing that made him admired kept placing him in danger. This tension gives the gladiator his haunting power. He lived in a world where survival increased value and value demanded further risk. The better he became, the more worth he had. The more worth he had, the more people wanted to see him tested again. The arena did not release a man from danger simply because he had proven himself. It asked him to prove himself again. Imagine the older Rome before the great stone amphitheaters dominated the imagination. Temporary wooden structures could be built, public spaces could be transformed, crowds gathered in heat, dust, and noise. Vendors moved, children stared, men argued, the elite sat where rank allowed, the poor stood or squeezed into worse places. The city became a theatre of itself. The day of games was not only about the fight, it was social life, it was politics, it was rumor. It was food, shouting, status, waiting, heat, smell, and spectacle. Rome was a city where people lived close together, where public events allowed the crowd to see itself, to feel its size, and to remember that it belonged to something larger than the household. The gladiator entered this atmosphere already carrying the weight of expectation. Before combat, there might be procession, display of weapons, presentation of fighters, and ceremonial movement. The crowd could inspect bodies and armor. A helmet was not only protection, it was image. A shield was not only defense, it was part of the visual language of the fight. The arena turned equipment into identity. Then came the moment of separation from ordinary life. The fighter stepped into the open space, sand underfoot, sky above, stone or timber around him, noise rising and falling like weather. Somewhere beyond the arena were kitchens, baths, markets, temples, homes, and quiet rooms. But inside the fighting ground, time narrowed. A man became intensely visible. His smallest movement mattered. His fear had no private place to hide. This is what Rome watched. Not only whether he would die, but whether he could remain composed while death approached. To modern eyes, the arena can seem purely cruel, and cruelty was certainly there. But to understand it historically, we must also see how Romans framed it to themselves. They did not usually describe their world as savage entertainment for its own sake. They connected the games to tradition, discipline, courage, punishment, public generosity, religious observance, and imperial power. That does not make the violence gentler. It makes it more revealing. People often make their harshest customs easier to accept by surrounding them with meaning. Rome did this again and again. The gladiator became wrapped in ideas larger than himself: courage, fate, punishment, memory, domination, the generosity of the powerful, the endurance of the body, the mastery of fear. Spectacle made violence feel ordered, rules made danger feel civilized, ceremony made cruelty feel traditional, applause made suffering feel shared. And yet, beneath every meaning, there was still a man. A man who woke in the training school, a man who felt old wounds stiffen in the morning, a man who knew the sound of practice weapons striking shields, a man who may have remembered another home, another language, another name, a man who may have entered the ludus in chains or under contract or after capture or through desperation. A man who learned to read opponents by the angle of a shoulder, the rhythm of a step, the hesitation before a strike. A man who understood that fear could not be removed, only trained into silence. This is where the sleep history story of gladiators becomes more than a story of combat. It becomes a story of human beings placed inside a machine of Roman meaning. The origin of the gladiator is therefore also the origin of a Roman habit, turning private pain into public order. Death became ceremony, ceremony became display, display became politics, politics became architecture, architecture became memory. and memory after many centuries became ruins visited by people who stand in silence where crowds once roared. But before the ruins, before the tourist paths, before the broken arches and moonlit photographs, there was a living system. There were men training behind walls, there were organizers counting costs, there were spectators waiting for the next festival, there were magistrates hoping to be remembered, there were families speaking of games already past, there were boys pretending to be famous fighters in alleyways. There were women and men whispering about the most beautiful gladiator. There were doctors examining wounds, there were cooks preparing heavy meals, there were guards watching doors, there were slaves carrying equipment, there were scribes recording names. And there were fighters looking toward the day they would be called. Not all would enter the Colosseum, not all lived in Rome. Amphitheaters spread through the Roman world, large and small, stone and local, each one adapting the language of Roman spectacle to its own city. The gladiator belonged not only to Rome itself but to the wider Roman imagination. From Italy to the provinces, the arena became one of the ways Roman culture announced itself. Where there was an amphitheater, there was a lesson. Rome could gather people. Rome could organize violence. Rome could classify bodies. Rome could make hierarchy visible. Rome could turn fear into entertainment. Rome could offer the crowd a world in miniature with order imposed around danger. The gladiator stood inside that lesson. To begin his history, then, we must begin with the society that needed him. Rome was a world of sharp divisions, citizen and non-citizen, free and enslaved, male and female, senator, equestrian, commoner, freedman, foreigner, prisoner. Honor and shame shaped public life. The body itself could carry legal and social meaning. Some bodies were protected, others were available to punishment, labor, display, or sale. The gladiator's body was one of those exposed bodies, yet the arena complicated everything. For a few minutes, the exposed body became the most watched body in the city. A man without honor could display the virtues honorable men praised. A slave could become more famous than a magistrate. A condemned fighter could command the attention of thousands. The crowd might know his name when it had forgotten the name of the official who paid for the games. Rome loved order, but the arena created emotional disorder. That was part of its fascination. The gladiator could disturb the categories that produced him. He was low but admired, dangerous but controlled, masculine but owned, famous but dishonored, powerful in the sand, powerless outside it. Alive because the crowd enjoyed him, endangered because the crowd wanted to enjoy him again. This tension did not weaken the spectacle. It fed it. As we move deeper into the story, we will enter the training schools, the different classes of fighters, the strange economy of fame and death, the daily rhythm of the arena, the politics of imperial games, and the long decline of a spectacle that had once seemed inseparable from Rome itself. But for now, the beginning is enough. The gladiator began in the shadow of the dead and grew in the gaze of the living. He emerged from funeral ritual, public ambition, Roman discipline, social inequality, military culture, and the human appetite for watching danger from a safe distance. He was shaped by a city that believed deeply in courage, yet denied dignity to many of those forced to display it. He belonged to a civilization that could build roads, laws, aqueducts, temples, libraries, and amphitheaters, and could also fill those amphitheaters with people waiting for blood. This is why the gladiator remains so difficult to forget, not because he was simple, because he was impossible to separate from Rome. The sand, the sword, the helmet, the crowd, the school, the funeral, the politician, the emperor, the slave market, the public festival, the stone arena, the private fear, all of it belonged to the same world. And slowly, as Rome grew larger, richer, and more confident, that world would create a place where the gladiator became more visible than ever before. A place of tunnels, cages, lifts, gates, shadows, and sunlight. A place where the city could gather by the tens of thousands. A place where Rome did not merely watch the gladiator. Rome watched itself, and the more Rome watched, the more carefully the spectacle had to be shaped. A gladiator was not simply thrown into the sand with a weapon and told to survive. That image belongs more to modern imagination than to the working reality of the arena. The Roman games were violent, but they were not random. They were organized, prepared, trained, financed, announced, judged, and remembered. They required schools, contracts, equipment, handlers, doctors, guards, officials, musicians, heralds, armorers, and men who understood how to turn danger into something the crowd could follow. This is where the gladiator became a profession. A brutal profession, a dishonored profession, but still a profession. The early formation of gladiatorial life depended on one important Roman truth: spectacle needed supply. If a wealthy man wished to give games, he needed fighters. If the public expected contests, someone had to train those fighters. If fighters were valuable, someone had to feed them, house them, discipline them, and protect the investment until the day of performance. Slowly, the world around the gladiator became more specialized. The training school was called a ludus. The word could mean a school, a game, or a place of training. But for the gladiator, the ludus was not a school in the gentle sense. It was a closed world, a place of repetition, fear, discipline, sweat, wounds, obedience, and waiting. Men entered it from different paths, but once inside, their lives were narrowed into routine. Some had been captured in war, some had been enslaved, some had been condemned by law, some had fallen into debt or desperation. Some entered voluntarily, signing away parts of their freedom for money, food, fame, or the possibility of escape from a life that already felt finished. That last group is important because it reminds us not to make the ancient world too simple. The gladiator was often a victim of force, but not always in the same way. Roman society could pressure a man long before chains appeared. Poverty could corner him, debt could humiliate him, failure could leave him with few honorable choices. The arena was dangerous and degrading, but to a desperate man it could also look like a gamble. A terrible gamble, but still a path. To become a gladiator was to accept a kind of living death. A man might swear an oath that placed his body under another's control. He accepted the possibility of being burned, bound, beaten, or killed by the sword. Such language was severe because the life was severe. He was giving himself to a system that demanded obedience before it offered survival. Inside the ludus, the old life began to fade. Names might change, status might change. The body became a thing to be trained, measured, strengthened, and corrected. The days were not filled with constant combat to the death. That would have been wasteful. A trained gladiator was valuable. Instead, the life was built on practice, repeated motion, wooden weapons, controlled drills, lessons in distance, timing, footwork, balance, and endurance. The same strike again and again, the same shield movement, the same recovery after a missed attack, the same careful learning of how to breathe while fear pressed against the chest. The men who trained gladiators knew that courage alone was not enough. A brave fool died quickly. A strong man without discipline could be trapped. A fast man without patience could rush into danger. A frightened man who lost control could become useless. So the school trained more than muscle. It trained the nerves. It trained the habit of standing still under pressure. It trained the eyes to watch an opponent's shoulder, not just the weapon. It trained the feet to move before panic spread through the body. It trained men to turn fear into rhythm. This is one reason gladiators fascinated the Roman crowd. They were not merely violent men, they were controlled men in violent conditions. The school itself was arranged to keep control. There were cells or small rooms, there were training yards, there were storage spaces for equipment, there were guards, there were instructors, there were ranks among the fighters. There was food because the body had to be maintained. There was medical care because wounded men could still be useful if they healed. There was punishment because the system depended on obedience. A gladiator might belong to a familia, not in the warm family sense, but as part of a household or group owned and managed by a trainer. The Lannister, the owner or manager of gladiators, stood at the center of this business. He bought men, trained them, leased them, sold them, and arranged their appearances. His work could be profitable, but Roman society did not fully respect him. He made money from bodies placed in danger, and that marked him. The Lannister lived in the same contradiction as the world he managed. His fighters could become famous. His school could be valuable. His services could be needed by powerful men. But the trade itself carried shame. This shame mattered in Rome. Romans were deeply sensitive to honor, rank, and public reputation. Certain professions, however popular, were considered morally stained because they involved selling the body for public display. Actors, prostitutes, and gladiators could all carry forms of social disgrace. The crowd might adore them, but adoration did not erase dishonor. For the gladiator, this meant that fame was never simple. A man could be cheered by thousands and still be legally degraded. He could be desired and still despised. He could be painted on a wall and still sleep behind locked doors. He could show courage that senators praised in speeches, while remaining outside the dignity those senators claimed for themselves. The early formation of gladiator schools made this contradiction permanent. The ludus did not only train fighters. It manufactured a particular kind of Roman figure, a man made visible through danger, valuable through risk, and famous through the possibility of death. To make the contests more interesting, the schools trained men into different fighting types. This was one of the most important developments in gladiatorial history. If every fighter used the same weapon and moved the same way, the games would become dull. Rome wanted tension, it wanted contrast. The arena became a place where different styles met each other, and each style created its own rhythm of fear. There was the murmillo, often imagined with a large shield, a sword, and a heavy helmet. He could seem solid and powerful, a fighter built around protection, patience, and pressure. Against him might stand the Threeks, with a smaller shield and a curved sword, moving differently, attacking from angles, carrying the memory of foreign enemies transformed into arena style. There was the Secutor, designed to pursue, with smooth helmet lines that protected him from the weapons of a very different opponent. And there was the Retiarius, one of the most visually strange figures of the arena, lighter, less armored, carrying a net and trident, depending on distance, timing, and nerve. The Retiarius was almost the opposite of the heavily armed fighter. He did not hide behind a great shield. He could not simply absorb punishment. He needed space. He needed movement. He needed the moment when a thrown net could turn the fight. To watch such a contest was to watch two ideas of survival meet each other: weight against speed, armor against exposure, pursuit against escape, pressure against timing. The crowd could understand the danger because the contrast was visible even from far away. This made gladiatorial combat theatrical without making it fake. The weapons were real, the wounds were real, the danger was real, but the structure was arranged for meaning. Each class of gladiator carried a shape, a silhouette, a way of moving, a kind of story. The audience could recognize them. They could compare them. They could have favorites. A man's equipment became part of his identity. Over time, the arena developed a visual language as clear to Roman spectators as the colors of modern teams are to sports crowds today. But unlike sport, the cost of failure could be a human life. Still, we should be careful. Not every fight ended in death. Gladiators were expensive to train and maintain. A good fighter was not something to throw away carelessly. The crowd enjoyed danger, but the system also valued survival. A man who fought well could be spared. A defeated fighter might appeal for mercy. The sponsor of the games, sometimes influenced by the crowd, might decide whether he lived or died. This created another layer of performance. A gladiator had to fight well enough to be worth saving. Even defeat had to be dignified. A man who panicked, ran, begged too early, or fought poorly might lose the crowd's sympathy. But a man who fought bravely, endured wounds, and accepted defeat with composure might be granted life. In such moments, the arena displayed Roman values in their harshest form. Mercy could exist, but it had to be earned through courage. Survival could be given, but only after the defeated man had shown that he understood how to face death. That is a cold idea, but it was part of the emotional architecture of the games. The crowd did not simply watch bodies collide, it judged character. It judged nerve, it judged style, it judged whether a man deserved another morning. In the schools, fighters learned this. They knew that the audience mattered. They knew that discipline could save them. They knew that reputation might protect them in moments when strength failed. The arena was not only a battlefield, it was a court of public feeling, and public feeling in Rome was powerful. As gladiatorial games grew from funeral contests into larger public spectacles, the organization around them became more complex. Wealthy families, magistrates, and later emperors used games to speak to the people. The event was never only entertainment, it was social exchange. The powerful gave spectacle. The crowd gave attention, approval, memory, and sometimes political support. This exchange had deep roots. Rome was a city where public generosity mattered. Leaders were expected to give. They funded buildings, temples, distributions, festivals, and games. Such gifts were not selfless, they created reputation. They bound the people emotionally to the gift. They turned wealth into public memory. A small game could honor a family, a larger game could lift a career, an extraordinary game could define an age. The gladiator stood at the center of this ambition, but again he did not control it. His risk became another man's generosity. His courage became another man's political offering. His blood, or the threat of it, became part of the relationship between the elite and the masses. The early republic had already taught Romans to value public competition. Families competed for office, glory, military command, and ancestral prestige. Funerary games fit naturally into this world. A noble family could honor its dead while also reminding everyone of its wealth and greatness. But as Rome conquered more territory and wealth increased, the scale of ambition grew. A simple ceremony was no longer enough. The number of gladiators increased. The settings became grander. The crowd's expectations rose. Once a public taste is created, it rarely remains still. This is one of the dangerous things about spectacle. What amazes one generation becomes normal to the next. What once seemed extravagant becomes expected. The giver must do more to be remembered. The crowd must be shown more to be impressed. The machine grows because everyone inside it has a reason to let it grow. The Lannister wants profit, the politician wants fame, the crowd wants excitement, the city wants festivals, the fighters want survival, and the system continues. But beneath the growth was the daily discipline of the schools. Without the ludus, the grand event could not exist. The arena's beauty, terror, and ceremony depended on unseen labor. Someone cleaned equipment, someone repaired shields, someone sharpened blades, someone prepared practice weapons, someone cooked the thick meals that kept fighters strong. Someone changed bandages, someone counted injuries, someone locked gates at night. The gladiator's life was therefore both extraordinary and repetitive. He lived for rare days of public intensity, but most of his existence was private routine. The soundscape of the ludus may have been very different from the arena. Instead of roaring crowds, there was the dull strike of wood on wood, the breath of men training, commands from instructors. Sand shifting under feet, metal being handled, water being carried, the occasional cry of pain, the low talk of men who knew they shared the same dangerous future. Some fighters may have formed bonds, it would be strange if they did not. Human beings create connection even in harsh places. A man might train beside another for months. He might learn his habits, his fears, his jokes, his silences. They might share food, stories, memories of distant places, or resentment toward the men who owned them. Yet the system could also place such men against each other or send one to die while the other watched. The ludus could create brotherhood, the arena could destroy it. This tension gives the early gladiator schools a quiet sadness. They were places of preparation, but also places of waiting. Every skill learned there had a shadow. A cleaner strike might help a man live, better footwork might save him, stronger arms might make him valuable, but each improvement also made him more suitable for the next public test. Training was hope and trap at the same time. For some, success could eventually lead to freedom. A gladiator who survived long enough and pleased the crowd or his owner might receive release, symbolized by the wooden sword, the rudis. this did not erase the past. It did not restore everything the arena had taken, but it offered a powerful dream. A man could imagine the day when he no longer had to fight under command. He could imagine walking away from the school not as property, not as a condemned body, but as someone who had endured the machine and outlived it. The hope of the Rudies must have mattered deeply. Hope often survives in small objects. A wooden sword could mean more than wood. It could mean mornings without fear. It could mean no more locked rooms. It could mean old wounds healing without the expectation of new ones. It could mean being remembered not only as a body in the sand, but as a man who survived Rome's hunger. Not all reached that day. Most did not, but the possibility shaped the mental world of the gladiator. Survival had stages. Survive training, survive the first fight, build reputation, avoid shame, please the crowd, heal between appearances, endure the next summons, perhaps one day earn freedom. The life was measured not in years but in chances. As the system grew, gladiators became part of Roman urban culture. Their images appeared in art, mosaics, lamps, household objects, and graffiti. Children may have imitated them, spectators discussed them, some women and men admired them intensely. Their names could circulate like those of athletes or performers. A successful gladiator could become a public fantasy, dangerous, disciplined, physically powerful, socially forbidden. Again, contradiction. Rome marked him as low, then turned him into desire. It denied him honor, then praised his courage. It feared disorder, then gathered thousands to watch controlled violence. It claimed moral seriousness, then built pleasure around pain. The gladiator made these contradictions visible because his life crossed boundaries. He was neither ordinary soldier nor simple criminal, neither actor nor athlete, neither slave only nor hero only. He belonged to a category Rome created for itself, a human being trained to perform danger in a way that could be judged as beautiful, brave, or shameful. The early formation of gladiator types also shows how Rome transformed enemies into entertainment. Some gladiator styles carried names or associations linked to foreign peoples Rome had fought. Over time, the exact historical connection could become less important than the arena image, but the pattern remained meaningful. Rome could take the memory of an enemy and turn it into costume, weapon, and performance. This was symbolic domination. A conquered world could be restaged before Roman eyes. The arena did not only show combat, it showed Rome's belief that the world could be classified, armed, paired, controlled, and watched. Different bodies, weapons, and identities were arranged into a spectacle where Rome remained the organizer. Even when two non-Roman styles appeared to clash, the deeper message was Roman control. The school taught the fighters. The sponsor paid for the event, the officials enforced the rules, the crowd judged the result, the empire owned the frame. This frame became stronger as Rome expanded beyond Italy. Amphitheaters appeared in many parts of the Roman world. Local elites adopted Roman forms of entertainment. To build or sponsor games was to participate in Roman culture. It showed loyalty, wealth, urban pride, and status. The gladiator moved through this expanding world as both performer and symbol. In provincial towns, the games may have felt different from the great spectacles of Rome itself, but the basic language remained recognizable. The arena gathered the community. Social ranks appeared in seating. Local pride attached itself to the event. The powerful displayed generosity. The crowd experienced Roman order through shared emotion. And somewhere behind it all, schools continued to prepare men for display. The gladiator's identity was therefore formed in layers. First the body, then the training, then the fighting type, then the reputation, then the memory. A new man entering the ludus may have arrived with a past, but the system gave him a new public meaning. He might become a murmillo, a threx, a secutor, a retiarius, or another specialized fighter. He learned the tools of that identity. He learned the movements expected of it. He learned the weaknesses of opponents likely to face him. He became legible to the crowd. To be legible was essential. The crowd needed to understand what it was seeing. A fight with no recognizable pattern would be confusing, but a fight between known types created anticipation. Spectators could feel the danger before the first strike. They could see at once who was heavier, who was exposed, who needed to close distance, who needed to escape, who might tire, who might trap the other. The duel became a story written in armor. This is why gladiatorial equipment was often dramatic. A helmet could hide the face and turn the fighter into a symbol. A crest could make him visible. A shield could define his posture. A net could create suspense the moment it was raised. A trident could make distance feel dangerous. A curved blade could suggest a different rhythm of attack. The human face sometimes disappeared behind bronze, but the human fear remained. One can imagine a trainee putting on heavy equipment for the first time, the helmet narrowing sound, the heat building quickly. The breath becoming louder inside metal, the weight of the shield pulling at the arm, the awareness that in the arena this protection would also become a burden. Armor saved, but armor tired. A helmet protected, but it limited vision. A shield blocked, but it demanded strength. Every advantage had a cost. Training was the art of living inside those costs. The instructors knew this. Former fighters especially would understand what new men did not yet know, that panic wastes breath, that anger opens the body, that exhaustion can kill before the blade does, that the crowd's noise must be heard and ignored at the same time. They trained men to become calm under impossible attention. That calm was not peace, it was control, and control was everything. The early gladiator system also required rules. Without rules, the spectacle could become chaos. The crowd needed fairness, or at least the appearance of fairness. Fighters had to be matched in ways that produced tension without making the result meaningless. Officials could intervene. Signals mattered. The sponsor's decision mattered. The appeal for mercy had form. Death, when ordered, also had expected behavior. Rome turned even killing into procedure. This procedure was part of what made the games acceptable to Roman audiences. Disorder frightened societies, but ordered violence can be made to look like justice, tradition, or art. The arena gave violence a boundary. Inside that boundary, things could happen that would be horrifying elsewhere. The walls separated spectacle from daily life. The rules separated combat from murder. The ceremony separated cruelty from chaos. But the separation was never complete. The crowd carried the emotions home. The city talked, names spread, images remained. The gladiator left the arena and entered Roman imagination. For the men themselves, the boundary between school and arena shaped time. Training days may have felt long and repetitive. The day of combat may have approached with a different weight. Perhaps rumors moved through the ludus first. A coming festival, a sponsor seeking fighters, a list being made, names selected, opponents assigned, equipment prepared. A man could know the date before knowing whether it would be his last. This waiting may have been one of the hardest parts. Human fear often grows in the space before danger. The fight itself demands action. Waiting leaves the mind open. A gladiator might sharpen focus, pray, talk, sleep badly, remember home, or pretend indifference. He might inspect gear. He might listen to older fighters. He might wonder whether the crowd would favor him. And yet by the time he entered the sand, he had to appear composed. The arena punished visible fear. The school existed to hide it. In this way, the early formation of the gladiator was not only physical but emotional. The system taught men how to be seen. It taught them how to stand in public danger. It taught them how to turn terror into posture. The crowd might never know what the man felt inside. It only saw whether he performed courage. That performance became the heart of gladiatorial identity. Over time, the profession acquired its own traditions, rankings, expectations, and dreams. A novice was not the same as a veteran. A man with victories carried a different aura. A fighter who had survived many appearances became valuable not only because of skill, but because the crowd knew him. Reputation could become armor of another kind. It could make people want to spare him. It could make sponsors reluctant to waste him. It could make opponents cautious, but reputation also brought pressure. The crowd expected greatness from famous men. A beloved fighter could not appear weak. A veteran could not seem afraid. A champion had to keep becoming the image people had made of him. This is another hidden cruelty of fame. It does not release a person from danger. It fixes them inside expectation. For Roman gladiators, that expectation could be deadly. The early schools created these famous men by grinding ordinary bodies through extraordinary discipline. Not every fighter became a legend. Many were forgotten, some died before their names could travel, some fought once or twice and disappeared from memory, some may have lived and been freed only to carry scars into old age. The historical record preserves fragments, not full lives, but those fragments are enough to show the shape of the world. A world where violence became craft, a world where craft became spectacle, a world where spectacle became politics, a world where politics became stone. The next step in this story is the rise of the great arena culture. The amphitheaters, the imperial games, the Colosseum, and the transformation of gladiators into one of the most recognizable symbols of Rome. But before we walk into the Colosseum's shadow, it is worth staying for a final moment inside the school, because the arena was only the visible surface. The ludus was where the gladiator was made. There, in enclosed courtyards and training grounds, men learned the slow grammar of survival. They learned how to lift the shield when the arm burned, how to step away without seeming to flee, how to fall in a way that did not end the fight too soon, how to read the crowd without becoming drunk on its sound, how to accept pain without letting the body collapse into panic. They learned that a fight could be lost before the blade touched flesh. They learned that death was not always sudden. Sometimes it approached as a date on a schedule, sometimes as a name called from a list, sometimes as a new opponent assigned in silence, sometimes as a wound that seemed small until fever came, and sometimes death stepped back. A man survived, the gate opened, the crowd roared, he returned to the school with blood dried on his skin and another chance placed before him like a fragile object. That was the rhythm of the gladiator's early world. Train, wait, fight, heal, be remembered, be summoned again. And as Rome grew richer and more powerful, that rhythm would be amplified until it echoed through the largest amphitheater the Roman world had ever seen. And before that echo reached the great amphitheater, it passed through the body of the gladiator himself. The Roman arena was built from stone, timber, money, politics, and crowd hunger. But the true center of it was always a human body trained to do something unnatural, to stand calmly in public danger while thousands watched. The crowd saw armor, weapons, movement, wounds, victory, defeat, mercy, and death, but beneath all of that was training. Training was the hidden world beneath the spectacle. It was the slow work that made the arena possible. A gladiator did not become frightening only because he carried a sword. He became frightening because he had been taught how to wait. How to breathe, how to step, how to measure distance, how to hide exhaustion, how to make fear useful. Fear was not removed from the gladiator. No training school could remove it completely. Any man who stepped into the arena knew what could happen there. He knew blades were not decorative. He knew the crowd's love could turn cold. He knew a mistake might open the body. He knew that a wound in the sand could become fever in the cell. He knew that another man, trained as carefully as he had been trained, would be looking for the smallest weakness. So the school did not destroy fear, it disciplined it. That distinction matters. The gladiator was not fearless in the simple heroic sense. He was trained to act while fear remained inside him. His courage was not the absence of terror. It was the ability to move with control while terror pressed against the ribs. Roman spectators admired this because it reflected one of their deepest ideals, the disciplined body under pressure. In Roman thought, uncontrolled emotion could be shameful, especially in public. A man might suffer, but he should not dissolve. He might face danger, but he should not flail like an animal. He might lose, but he should know how to lose. The arena turned that ideal into a visible test. Every fighter became a lesson in composure. Inside the training yard, that lesson began with repetition. The first work was not glorious, it was not the roar of the Colosseum, it was not sunlight on bronze, it was not a dramatic final duel. It was the dull and exhausting rhythm of practice. A man lifted the shield again, he lowered it, he stepped forward, he stepped back, he turned, he struck, he recovered. He learned where his feet should be before his mind had time to decide. He learned that the arm must obey even when tired. He learned that a shield held too low could invite death. He learned that a sword swung wildly might look powerful but leave the body open. The instructors understood this. They had seen men die from small errors, a step too far, a hand too slow, a glance in the wrong direction, a moment of anger, a breath wasted in panic. In the arena, the difference between life and death could be smaller than the width of a blade. So training narrowed the world until every movement had purpose. A gladiator learned not only how to attack, but how not to expose himself while attacking. He learned not only how to defend, but how not to become trapped inside defense. He learned that survival was often quiet, keeping balance, saving breath, refusing the reckless move, waiting for the other man to become impatient. The crowd loved boldness. But the school taught patience. This tension followed the gladiator everywhere. A boring fighter might lose public favor, a reckless fighter might lose his life. A wise fighter had to offer enough movement to hold the crowd, enough courage to win respect, and enough caution to remain alive. He was not only fighting an opponent, he was balancing spectacle against survival. His equipment shaped that balance. The different kinds of gladiators were not random costumes, they created distinct forms of danger. Each type of armor and weapon forced the body into a particular way of fighting. The gladiator did not simply choose a style as a modern athlete might choose a preference. He was trained into a role, and that role shaped how the crowd saw him. A heavily armed fighter felt the arena through weight. A large shield gave protection but demanded strength. It could cover the body, absorb blows, and allow the fighter to press forward with slow pressure. But it also tired the arm, it narrowed movement, it made speed costly. The man behind it had to know how to advance without wasting energy, how to use the shield not only as a wall but as a weapon of space. A heavy helmet protected the head and face, but it also changed the world. Sound became trapped and strange. Breath warmed the metal, vision narrowed. The crowd became less like individual people and more like a weather of noise. The opponent's body had to be read through limited openings. The fighter had to learn where danger was even when he could not see everything clearly. Protection always asked for payment. The lighter fighter paid differently. The retiarius with his net and trident carried one of the strangest identities of the arena. He had less armor, he was more exposed, he depended on distance, movement, and timing. He could not afford to be caught too soon. His net, if thrown well, could change the fight in an instant. If thrown badly, it could leave him vulnerable. The trident gave reach, but reach meant little if a heavier opponent forced close contact. For the crowd, this created beautiful tension. The secutor pressed forward like a hunter designed to survive the net. The retiarius moved away, waiting for space. One man wanted distance to collapse, the other wanted distance to remain alive. Every step mattered. This was not chaos. It was a kind of violent grammar. Roman spectators learned to read it. They understood the danger of a missed cast, the pressure of a shield advance, the desperation of a trapped fighter, the fatigue of a man carrying too much weight under the sun. The arena became exciting because its patterns were visible. A good fight gave the crowd time to understand the danger. This is why training had to be specific. A fighter trained as one type could not simply become another overnight. Each role shaped the body differently. Heavy fighters needed endurance under weight. Lighter fighters needed speed and timing. Men with shields trained posture and pressure. Men with nets trained rhythm and distance. Men using curved blades learned angles of attack. Men behind large helmets learned how to read with limited sight. The weapon was not separate from the man, it became part of his nervous system. Day after day, the gladiator learned the habits of his equipment, the grip of a sword, the drag of a shield, the heat under a helmet. The moment when the shoulder began to burn, the way sand shifted beneath a turn, the small delay between deciding to move and moving while burdened by armor, the danger of overreaching. The value of keeping the nays alive and flexible. The arena rewarded the man whose body remembered before his mind became afraid. That kind of memory is made slowly. In the training yard, wooden practice weapons might replace sharpened steel. They could even be heavier than real weapons, forcing the arms to strengthen through difficulty. Posts could be used for striking practice. Instructors corrected stance and rhythm. Men sparred under watch. Mistakes were punished by pain, humiliation, or exhaustion. A fighter learned not only from victory but from being struck, trapped, thrown off balance, or made to repeat a movement until pride disappeared. The body was broken down into obedience, but obedience alone was not enough. The gladiator had to develop presence. Presence was the mysterious quality that made the crowd look at one man more than another. A gladiator who moved with calm could command attention before striking. A fighter who knew when to pause could make the next action feel larger. A man who accepted a wound without collapsing into panic might win the crowd's respect even while losing the fight. This was part of arena identity. The gladiator was trained for violence but also for visibility. He needed to know how he appeared. The arena was not a hidden battlefield in fog, it was a public circle of judgment. The fighter's courage, fear, pain, skill, and failure were all exposed. Every movement became public property. This public exposure shaped the mind. Many men in ancient war died unseen by history. They fell in fields, forests, ditches, sieges, and ships. Their names vanished with the dust, but the gladiator died or survived under the gaze of a crowd. His fate was witnessed. His body became an event. His posture at the moment of defeat mattered because thousands could remember it. To be watched so closely is its own form of violence. The gladiator had no private fear. When he entered the arena, fear became something other people consumed. The crowd wanted to see risk but not necessarily panic. Panic could disgust them. Discipline thrilled them more. A man who controlled himself while facing death gave the crowd the feeling that it was watching something meaningful, not merely brutal. And so the gladiator learned to perform courage even when courage felt far away. Perhaps this is why the image of the gladiator has lasted so long. He stands in memory not only as a fighter, but as a figure of controlled fear. A helmeted man in the sand, alone before the crowd, carrying more symbolism than any one body should bear. But in the daily reality of the school, the symbol had to eat. Food was part of training. Gladiators needed strength, weight, and endurance. Ancient references suggest that their diet may have included substantial grain and legumes, food that built mass and sustained labor. The exact details varied across place and time, and we should not imagine every school was the same. But the basic truth is simple. A gladiator's body was an investment, and investments had to be maintained. The food may not have been luxurious, but it was functional. A thin, starving fighter was not useful. A body with some weight could better survive training and absorb injury. Strong bones, thick muscle, endurance, and recoverable energy mattered. The spectacle needed men who could endure more than one brief burst of strength. The arena did not reward only the man who struck hard. It rewarded the man who could continue after the first exchange, after the first wound, after the first wave of exhaustion. Medicine also mattered. This is one of the quieter realities of gladiatorial life. A society that exposed men to violence also developed practical knowledge around wounds. Cuts, fractures, bruises, infections, and damaged joints were part of the profession. A fighter who survived a bout might still be in danger afterward. Blood loss, fever, swelling, and badly healed wounds could end a career or a life. The school therefore needed people who knew how to treat the body, not out of kindness alone, out of value. A trained fighter represented money, time, and reputation. Keeping him alive made business sense. A gladiator might be socially degraded, but his body could be carefully managed. Again, contradiction appears. Rome could treat a man as dishonored property while also investing heavily in his recovery. That contradiction lived in every bandage. A wounded gladiator might be given care not because his life was sacred, but because his life remained useful. Yet from the man's own perspective, useful care was still care. A treated wound might mean another season of breathing, another fight survived, another chance, however distant, at freedom. The daily rhythm of training was therefore practical, not purely dramatic. Eat, train, rest, heal, repeat, learn the weapon, study the opponent, endure discipline, wait for the next appearance. The waiting was part of the training too. A man might spend far more days preparing than fighting. This slow passage of time is important for sleep history because it brings us closer to the true human experience. The gladiator was not always in motion. Much of his life may have been contained in ordinary moments inside an extraordinary system. Waking in a small room, hearing other men stir, feeling old pain in the joints, chewing simple food, washing dust from skin, listening to rumors, watching new men arrive, seeing veterans depart, wondering whose name would be called next. The arena was sudden. The school was long, and because the school was long, relationships formed there. Rivalries, friendships, fear, envy, instruction, imitation, silence. A new fighter would look to older men trying to learn which habits helped survival. A veteran might teach, mock, ignore, or warn him. Some men perhaps became close because danger makes ordinary social distance harder to maintain. Others may have guarded themselves, knowing the system could turn any connection into grief. In a gladiator school, every friendship had a shadow. The man beside you today might be gone after the next games. Or worse, he might one day stand across from you. This possibility would have shaped trust. The ludus was not a normal household, though it used household language. It was a forced community of men whose futures were controlled by others. They shared routines but not safety. They shared danger but not always loyalty. They could support each other and compete with each other. They could admire skill in a man they might someday need to defeat. The emotional life of such a place must have been complicated. Ancient sources rarely give us the private interior of gladiators in their own words. Most of what survives comes through the eyes of elites, inscriptions, images, legal references, and material remains. So we must be careful. We cannot invent exact thoughts, but we can understand the pressures. We can see the conditions that shaped feeling. Confinement, training, public exposure, danger, injury, fame, shame, and hope. Hope may be the most important of these. Without hope, discipline becomes harder to sustain. For a gladiator, hope could take several forms: the hope of surviving the first fight, the hope of earning admiration, the hope of avoiding a cruel opponent, the hope of being spared after defeat, the hope of receiving better treatment, the hope of money, the hope of freedom, the hope of becoming known as more than a disposable body. Some hopes were small: a better meal, a healed wound, a kind word from an instructor, a rumor that a certain sponsor was generous with mercy, a belief that the crowd liked brave men. Other hopes were larger: the wooden sword, the rudies, freedom from the arena, a life after the school. The idea of the rudies gave the gladiator's life a direction beyond mere survival. It did not guarantee peace. A freed gladiator still carried stigma, scars, and memories. He might remain connected to the arena as an instructor or guard. He might struggle to enter ordinary society, but freedom mattered. It changed the meaning of endurance. A man could count survival not only as delay, but as movement toward an ending. The dream of leaving helped make staying bearable, but the arena did not release easily. Some men may have returned even after freedom, whether from need, habit, fame, or lack of other choices. A life built around danger can make ordinary life feel strange. A man trained for spectacle might not find a simple place in society. He had been made into an arena identity. The world outside might not know what to do with him, and he might not know what to do with himself. This too is part of the tragedy. The system did not merely use the body, it reshaped the self. A gladiator's identity was carved by repetition, danger, shame, and applause. He became known by a fighting name, a type, a record, perhaps a style. The crowd might not care where he was born, who his mother had been, what language he first spoke, what childhood he lost, or what gods he prayed to before Rome took him in. It cared what he did in the sand. The arena simplified him, but the man remained more complicated than the role. This is where the historian must listen carefully to silence. The records give us names, victories, images, fragments, and judgments. They rarely give us the full life. Yet the silence itself tells us something. The gladiator was visible in death and performance, but often invisible in interior life. Rome watched him intensely but did not fully hear him. He was famous without being known. That phrase captures much of the gladiator's place in Roman culture. Famous without being known, desired without being honored, trained without being free, admired without being equal. One of the most powerful parts of gladiatorial identity was the way armor could both hide and create the person. A helmet covered the face, removing individual expression and making the fighter seem more than human or less than human, depending on the viewer. The body became silhouette: crest, shield, blade, net, trident, greaves, bare arm, exposed torso, heavy shoulder guard. The crowd could recognize the type even when it could not see the man. This was useful for spectacle. It turned combat into an image. The Murmillo, the Secutor, the Threeks, the Retiarius, and others became recognizable figures in a public imagination. Their differences gave the arena variety. Their pairings gave the crowd anticipation. Their bodies became moving symbols, but for the fighter inside the armor, the experience was physical and intimate, sweat under leather. Metal pressing against skin, dust sticking to oil, old wounds stretched by movement, the smell of sand, bodies, animals, smoke and heat, the muffled roar of thousands, the sudden quiet inside the self before action begins, the weapon in the hand both familiar and terrifying. A man could train for years and still feel the first moment of a fight as a threshold. There is always a difference between practice and reality. In practice, pain teaches. In the arena, pain may decide. In practice, a mistake is corrected. In the arena, a mistake may be remembered by others after the man himself is gone. This awareness sharpened everything. The gladiator had to manage energy. Too much aggression early could exhaust him. Too much caution could anger the crowd or allow the opponent to control the fight. The sun might be hot, the sand might shift, a wound might weaken the arm, blood might make a grip uncertain, breathing might become harder under a helmet, noise might confuse rhythm, the eyes had to remain clear. The best fighters must have known how to slow time. Not literally, of course, but through training they could make danger readable. They could notice what an untrained man missed: a shoulder turning too soon, a foot planted too heavily, a shield dropping with fatigue, a pattern repeated one time too many. Combat at that level becomes a language of tiny warnings. The crowd saw drama, the fighter saw information. This is part of why veterans mattered. They had lived long enough to develop practical knowledge that could not be taught in a single lesson. A veteran knew how fear changed a new fighter. He knew how the crowd's noise could push men into foolish bravery. He knew how exhaustion looked before it became collapse. He knew how to make another man hurry. He also knew that luck had a place. Training could reduce danger but not remove it. A stumble, a broken strap, a weapon slipping, a wound in the wrong place, a decision from the sponsor, a crowd in a cruel mood, all could change fate. The gladiator lived in a world where skill and chance stood close together. Romans often spoke of fortune as a force in human life. The gladiator understood fortune in the body. He could train, obey, fight well and still fall. He could make a mistake and survive because the opponent missed the opening. He could be defeated and live because the crowd admired him. He could win and later die from infection. He could become famous through one astonishing moment, then vanish in the next. This uncertainty gave the arena its emotional power. No one fully knew, not the crowd, not the sponsor, not the opponent, not the gladiator. The event unfolded in public, but fate remained private until the final moment. As gladiators became more recognizable, their identities entered everyday Roman life. Images of fighters appeared on household objects, mosaics, lamps, and walls. Names were scratched into surfaces. Victories were remembered. Some gladiators became objects of desire. Their bodies, marked by danger, seemed to carry a forbidden attraction. A man degraded by law could become powerful in imagination. This disturbed moralists. Some Roman writers criticized the attraction of the games, the cruelty of the crowd, or the moral danger of enjoying blood. Others used the gladiator as an example of endurance. Philosophers could look at a man facing death in the arena and draw lessons about courage, fate, or self-control. Even critics could not ignore the symbolic force of the gladiator. He was too visible. The arena had made him part of Roman thought, but visibility did not mean comfort. The gladiator remained bound to a harsh system. He could be punished, he could be sold, he could be forced to fight. His body could be inspected, valued, and risked. If he was a volunteer, he still accepted degradation by contract. If he was enslaved or condemned, he had even less control. The training yard gave him skills, but not full ownership of his life. That is the central sadness of gladiatorial discipline. It produced strength in men whose freedom had often been taken. It created courage under conditions of coercion. It made bodies impressive while denying those bodies dignity. It turned survival into art, then sold the art to the crowd. And still within that system, human agency did not disappear completely. A gladiator could choose how to stand, how to fight, how to endure, how to accept defeat, how to build reputation, how to protect a weaker part of the body, how to conserve breath, how to refuse panic. These choices were narrow, but they were real. Sometimes history is made not from freedom in the grand sense, but from small decisions made inside confinement. The gladiator lived inside those small decisions. Every day in the ludus prepared him for them. The training yard was a place where the body learned what the mind could not think through quickly enough. The shield lifted because it had lifted 1,000 times. The feet moved because they had moved before. The eyes followed the opponent's center. The hand tightened, the body turned, the breath held, released, steadied. A fight could look sudden to the crowd, but it was built from years of slow repetition. This slow repetition is what separates the gladiator from the fantasy image. He was not merely a wild killer or a doomed victim. He was a trained specialist in a violent public craft. His life was shaped by institutions, economy, law, shame, fame, and discipline. He belonged to a world that required him to be both controlled and dangerous. That balance was difficult. Too controlled and the fight lost fire. Too dangerous and the spectacle could become unmanageable. Rome wanted danger inside a frame. The gladiator was the body that carried the danger. The rules, weapons, armor, pairings, and schools created the frame. As this system matured, it became ready for larger stages. The early funeral contests and temporary spectacles could no longer contain what the games had become. Rome's appetite had grown, its wealth had grown, its rulers had grown more powerful, its people had learned to expect extraordinary displays. The city needed places where spectacle could be organized on a scale that matched imperial ambition. The gladiator, shaped in the school, would now be placed inside architecture built for mass emotion. The amphitheater would become his world, not only as a building but as a machine of sight, rows of spectators rising above him, entrances and exits controlling movement. Barriers separating crowd from danger, officials managing order, sponsors displaying power, the city gathering around a single open space, and at the center still the trained body. A man with a weapon, a man with fear, a man with a role, a man whose name might be shouted by people who would never know where he had come from. Before we enter that vast stone world, we should remember the quiet truth beneath it. The Colosseum did not create the gladiator, it inherited him, it magnified him. It made him more visible. But the gladiator had already been shaped in smaller arenas, funeral rites, training schools, public ambition, and the Roman obsession with disciplined courage. The Colosseum would give him a stage large enough for empire. But the essential story was already there in the ludus. The enclosed yard, the repeated movement, the heavy shield, the net thrown again and again, the instructor's correction, the wound washed clean, the name added to a list, the silence before a gate opened. This was the making of the gladiator, not in one heroic moment, but slowly. Through hunger, pain, repetition, shame, hope, and the terrible education of fear. And when the great arena finally called, the man who walked into the sand carried all of that with him. And what waited beyond the gate was not only an arena, it was Rome made into architecture. The amphitheater was one of the most powerful inventions of Roman public life, not because Rome was the first society to gather people for spectacle, but because Rome learned how to build spectacle into stone. The amphitheater took the older habits of funeral contests, temporary games, military display, punishment, and public entertainment, and gave them a permanent shape. It created a world where thousands of people could look down at one open space and feel, for a few hours, that they were part of the same story. The gladiator had been trained in enclosed yards, but now he stood inside a building designed for mass emotion. Before the Colosseum, Rome already knew how to watch. Crowds gathered for chariot races, theatre, executions, triumphs, festivals, and games. The city was not quiet. It was a place of streets, markets, temples, arguments, processions, announcements, smoke, animals, carts, voices, and constant movement. Public life mattered deeply. A Roman did not experience power only through laws and taxes. He experienced it through buildings, ceremonies, food distributions, games, and the presence of authority in the body of the city. The amphitheater gathered all of this into one intense form. It gave the crowd a place to sit. It gave the powerful a place to be seen. It gave violence a boundary. It gave fear a stage. And at the center it placed the gladiator. The greatest symbol of this world would be the Colosseum, though Romans knew it as the Flavian Amphitheater. It rose in the heart of Rome after a time of civil war, instability, and imperial anxiety. The emperors who built it were not merely giving the people a building, they were making a statement. After the excesses and private grandeur associated with Nero, a new dynasty needed to show that the center of Rome belonged again to the public. The great amphitheater stood where imperial pleasure had once claimed space, and it offered that space back as spectacle. This was politics in stone. A building could speak without words. It could say, "The emperor gives." It could say, "Rome is stable again." It could say, "The people have not been forgotten." It could say, "The power that controls the empire can also entertain the city." The Colosseum was not only an arena, it was a promise of order after disorder, and order mattered. In the Roman imagination, the emperor was more than a ruler sitting far above the crowd. He was a giver of peace, food, justice, victory, and public pleasure. He was expected to protect the city, feed it, impress it, and remind it of Rome's greatness. Games were part of that relationship. When an emperor sponsored spectacle, he was not simply amusing people, he was performing generosity and control. The crowd came to watch gladiators, but it also came to watch power behave. Where did the emperor sit? How did he appear? Did he seem generous? Did he listen to the crowd? Did he grant mercy? Did he ignore them? Did the games feel magnificent enough? Was the city being honored? Were the people being treated as witnesses to greatness? Every public event carried meaning. The amphitheater turned politics into shared emotion. From the outside, the Colosseum must have seemed astonishing. Arches rose in ordered layers. Stone opened into passageways. The building was massive but not shapeless, it had rhythm. Its repeated arches gave the impression of strength held under control. It was not wild architecture. It was Roman architecture, practical, organized, confident, and designed to manage human movement on a grand scale. A crowd of tens of thousands could enter, move through corridors, find places, and look down into the arena. Social rank shaped the seating. The most powerful and honored sat closest to the action. Others rose higher and farther away. The building did not erase Roman hierarchy, it displayed it. Even in entertainment, Rome arranged people by status. The arena floor was open to all eyes, but the seats reminded everyone where they belonged. This is one of the quieter truths of Roman spectacle. It created unity and division at the same time. The crowd shared a single event. They gasped together, shouted together, waited together, judged together. Yet they did so from places that reflected the structure of Roman society. Senators, equestrians, ordinary citizens, women, foreigners, the poor, and the socially marginal did not all experience the building equally. The amphitheatre gathered Rome, but it also ranked Rome. The gladiator stood below all of them. In one sense, he was the lowest figure in the building. In another, he was the one everyone watched. That contradiction shaped the emotional power of the games. The man in the sand had less legal dignity than many of those above him, yet for the duration of the fight he became the center of attention. The crowd's eyes moved with his body, his courage changed their mood, his wound changed their breath, his victory made them roar, his defeat made them lean forward. He was socially beneath them but visually above everything else. The arena inverted the world for a moment, not completely. Never completely, but enough to create fascination. The Colosseum was designed to intensify that fascination. Beneath and around the arena were spaces of preparation, movement, concealment, and control. Later arrangements included underground passages holding areas, mechanisms, and hidden routes through which animals, scenery, fighters, and workers could be managed. The visible performance depended on invisible labor. What the crowd saw as sudden appearance had been prepared by many unseen hands. Rome loved the effect of revelation. A gate opened, a fighter emerged, an animal appeared, a condemned man was brought forward, a stage setting changed. The crowd saw a world rise from below. But underneath the spectacle were workers sweating in darkness, handlers controlling dangerous animals, slaves moving equipment, officials managing timing, and men waiting for their turn. The Colosseum was a machine of visibility built on invisible bodies. The gladiator belonged to both worlds. He waited below, then appeared above. He moved from shadow into light. He passed from preparation into judgment. The moment he entered the arena, the hidden world released him into public meaning. Imagine that passage slowly. A man standing near the gate, the helmet heavy in his hands or already lowered over his face. The smell of leather, oil, metal, sweat, animals, dust, and old blood. The muffled roar beyond the barrier. The knowledge that above him were people who had eaten, spoken with friends, placed wagers, laughed, argued, and waited for entertainment. For the crowd, the fight was part of a day. For him, it could be the day. This gap between spectator time and fighter time is one of the most haunting parts of the arena. A viewer might remember a bout as exciting, disappointing, brave, or dull. Then he might return home, speak of it at dinner, and sleep. The gladiator carried the same event in scars, fever, reputation, or death. The crowd consumed danger without paying its full price. That is the essence of spectacle. It allows many to feel intensity through the risk of a few. Rome understood this better than almost any society of the ancient world. But the games were not always only gladiator against gladiator. The amphitheatre could host several forms of spectacle. There were animal hunts, executions, staged mythological punishments, displays of exotic beasts, and different kinds of combat. The day could unfold in sections with varied emotional rhythms. Morning might bring hunts or animal displays. Midday could involve executions or punishments. Later, gladiatorial contests might carry the greatest drama of skill, courage, and judgment. To modern listeners, this mixture can feel strange and brutal. It was brutal, but for Roman audiences, these categories had meaning. Animal hunts displayed imperial reach over nature and distant lands. Executions displayed state power over criminals, rebels, enslaved bodies, and those marked as outside protection. Gladiatorial contests displayed trained courage, discipline, and controlled risk. Together, they made the amphitheatre a theatre of Roman order. The wild was brought in. The condemned were punished. The trained fighter was tested. The crowd was shown a world arranged around Roman power. This is why exotic animals mattered. A lion, leopard, bear, elephant, or other creature did not appear only as an animal. It represented distance conquered. It suggested provinces, deserts, forests, mountains, and imperial networks. To bring such creatures into Rome required money, transport, control, and reach. When the crowd saw them, it was seeing the empire made visible through living bodies. The amphitheater turned geography into entertainment. The same was true of fighters with foreign styles, costumes, names, and weapons. Rome had conquered or fought many peoples. In the arena, the memory of enemies could be reshaped into spectacle. This did not always preserve accurate cultural reality. The arena simplified and transformed, but the emotional message remained. The wider world had been gathered under Roman eyes. The gladiator again stood at the center of this imperial imagination. He could be a captive from war. He could be dressed in a style recalling a defeated people. He could perform danger on behalf of a system that had already claimed his life. The empire turned conquest into performance. Yet the crowd did not experience the games only as political symbols. They experienced them bodily. Heat, noise, hunger, excitement, discomfort, smell, anticipation, fear, delight, disgust, laughter, impatience. The amphitheater was not an abstract idea, it was a living crowd under the sky. People arrived early, they looked for seats, they watched others enter. They noticed rank and clothing, they spoke of previous games, they argued about fighters, they waited for the sponsor. They reacted to the emperor. They shouted names, they expressed approval or anger with their voices. The crowd itself became a force. Roman leaders understood that crowds could be dangerous but also useful. A crowd gathered for entertainment could reveal public mood. It could cheer the emperor, it could make demands, it could ask for mercy. It could complain about shortages, officials, taxes, or unpopular decisions. The amphitheater gave the people a place where their collective voice became audible. The emperor could ignore many individuals. He could not so easily ignore a roaring crowd. This did not make Rome democratic in the modern sense. The crowd did not rule the empire, but public opinion mattered in visible moments. A wise ruler understood the emotional economy of spectacle. He knew when generosity helped. He knew when cruelty might please or disturb. He knew that appearing with the people could strengthen his image. He knew that games could calm tension, celebrate victory, mark religious festivals, or display wealth. The amphitheater was therefore not outside politics, it was one of politics' most public stages. The gladiator's fate could become part of this exchange. When a defeated fighter appealed for mercy, the crowd might shout its preference. The sponsor or emperor might decide. The exact gestures used and their meanings are debated, and later imagination has simplified them too much. But the broader truth remains. Mercy and death were sometimes performed through public decision. The defeated body became a place where power, crowd feeling, and Roman values met. A man kneeling in the sand could become the center of a political moment. If spared, the giver appeared merciful. If killed, the giver appeared severe. If the crowd's wish was followed, the ruler appeared attentive. If ignored, he appeared distant or cruel depending on the mood. The gladiator's body carried messages far beyond himself. This is difficult to sit with, but it is necessary. In the arena, human life became a language powerful people could speak. And yet inside that language, the individual still mattered. The crowd did not respond only to abstract symbols. It watched skill, it watched bravery, it remembered names, it loved style. A fighter who showed discipline, elegance, and endurance could win affection. The arena was cruel but not indifferent. It created emotional bonds between spectators and fighters, even if those bonds were unequal and dangerous. A spectator might favor a certain gladiator the way one favors a champion. He might know his record, he might admire his weapon style, he might repeat stories of a remarkable victory, he might scratch a name onto a wall, he might feel genuine grief if that fighter died. But this affection did not necessarily challenge the system. In fact, it could strengthen it. The more people cared about individual gladiators, the more they returned to watch. The more they watched, the more valuable the games became. The more valuable the games became, the more the system continued. The arena could turn pity into loyalty. It could turn admiration into appetite. This is one of the hidden mechanisms of spectacle. It allows the viewer to feel deeply while still supporting the structure that causes the pain. A crowd might beg for one man's life and return the next week to watch another man risk his. Emotion did not end the arena, emotion fed it. The Colosseum intensified this by scale. A small contest could produce excitement, a vast amphitheater could produce awe. When thousands of people reacted together, each person's feeling grew larger. One shout became part of a wave. One gasp joined many. One moment of silence became terrifying because so many shared it. The building transformed individual reaction into collective force. For the gladiator, this must have been overwhelming. A man could train against weapons. He could train against fatigue. He could train against fear, but could he train against the sound of Rome itself? The crowd could become almost like an opponent. Its noise pressed down, it rewarded certain actions, it punished hesitation, it could call for mercy or death, it could lift a fighter into fame or abandon him in defeat. To survive the arena, a gladiator had to understand not only combat but public feeling. He had to hear without obeying too quickly, he had to perform without losing himself. He had to give the crowd enough to remain loved, but not so much that he died for their excitement. This was a delicate art. The greatest gladiators were likely those who understood the crowd as well as the weapon. They knew when to press forward, when to make courage visible, when to pause, when to rise after a wound, when to show that pain had not mastered them, when to let the audience see the struggle clearly. The arena rewarded legibility. A brave act hidden in confusion was less valuable than a brave act everyone could understand. The gladiator's courage had to be seen to exist publicly. This was not ordinary courage, it was theatrical courage, but theatrical does not mean false. A man can perform courage and truly be courageous at the same time. The gladiator's bravery was shaped for spectators, but the danger remained real. That combination is what made the arena so gripping. The crowd knew it was watching a constructed event, yet the blood was not an illusion. Rome mastered the dangerous border between performance and reality. The Colosseum stood directly on that border. It was a theatre, but not only a theatre. It was a place of punishment, but not only a court. It was a political stage, but not only a government building. It was a religious and ceremonial space at times, but not only a temple. It was a sports arena, but not merely sport. It was all of these at once held inside stone. The gladiator's place in that world was equally layered. He was fighter, performer, property, criminal in some cases, celebrity in others, symbol, worker, victim, and agent of his own survival. The crowd could reduce him to a role, but the historian must restore some of his complexity. The Colosseum's sand covered many kinds of lives. A prisoner of war who had once fought Rome in another land. An enslaved man trained from youth. A condemned criminal with little chance of survival. A desperate volunteer who signed away freedom for money. A veteran who had survived enough bouts to become known. A freed gladiator perhaps returning as instructor or performer. A young man entering for the first time carrying a fear no applause could remove. To the crowd they appeared as types. To themselves they had pasts. The arena compressed those pasts into a few visible minutes. Imperial spectacle also changed the scale of resources behind the games. A great event required planning across many trades. Animals had to be captured and transporting. Fighters had to be trained and scheduled. Equipment had to be made and maintained. Buildings had to be repaired. Food had to be supplied. Officials had to organize order. Security had to be maintained. Announcements had to be made. Sometimes elaborate scenery or staged settings had to be prepared. The games were not spontaneous cruelty, they were administrative cruelty. This is a chilling thought because it reveals something essential about empire. Violence at scale requires organization. The same Roman talent that built roads and aqueducts could also build systems for public killing. The same discipline that moved armies and managed provinces could arrange spectacles where danger appeared smoothly before a cheering crowd. Rome's brilliance and brutality were not separate talents. They were often the same talent turned toward different ends. The amphitheater shows this clearly. Its architecture solved practical problems: crowd flow, visibility, social order, safety, staging, access, and repetition. It was efficient, it was impressive, it was durable. It was also built to make violent spectacle possible again and again. A beautiful structure can serve a harsh purpose. History often asks us to hold such contradictions without looking away. The Colosseum was both a marvel of engineering and a place of suffering. It was both public gift and instrument of power. It was both entertainment venue and theatre of death. It was both a symbol of Rome's greatness and evidence of Rome's appetite. The gladiator walked through all of these meanings. By the height of imperial spectacle, the games had become part of Rome's emotional calendar. Festivals, imperial celebrations, military victories, funerary commemorations, dedications, and political gestures could all involve public entertainment. The people expected these events not as rare miracles but as part of urban life. To rule Rome was in part to manage expectation. A ruler who gave too little might seem ungenerous. A ruler who gave magnificently could be remembered with warmth, at least for a time. But generosity through spectacle was never free. Someone paid in money, someone else paid in bodies. The audience often saw only the gift. The historian must see the cost. For gladiators, the imperial age brought both opportunity and danger. Larger spectacles could create greater fame. More organized systems might mean better training, better medical care, and more regular structures. But the scale also meant more demand. More games required more bodies, more spectacle required novelty. The crowd that had seen much could become hard to impress. Novelty is a dangerous hunger. A society that constantly seeks stronger spectacle may begin to treat ordinary suffering as insufficient. It asks for something rarer, stranger, larger, more intense. The arena's history is partly the history of this appetite growing and being fed. Yet even in the grandest games, the most powerful moment could remain very simple. Two men facing each other, the crowd quieting, a shield lifted, a net held ready, a sword angled low, a foot moving through sand. The entire empire, for a breath, reduced to distance between bodies. This simplicity was the heart of the spectacle. No matter how grand the building, no matter how rich the sponsor, no matter how many animals or decorations or ceremonies surrounded the day, the gladiatorial duel returned attention to one question. How will this man face danger? That question has never lost its power. The Romans answered it in a way that reveals them deeply. They did not ask it privately. They asked it in public with tickets, seats, hierarchy, architecture, law, money, ritual, and applause. They built an entire world around watching the answer. But the man in the sand did not answer as an idea. He answered with his body. He answered by stepping forward, by holding the shield, by refusing to run. By striking, by bleeding, by falling, by rising, by looking toward the place where mercy might come. And above him Rome watched, the emperor watched, the elite watched, the poor watched, visitors watched, children watched, people who had never held a sword watched, people who had seen war watched, people who came for beauty watched, people who came for cruelty watched, people who came because everyone else came watched. In that shared gaze, the gladiator became more than himself. He became Rome's chosen image of danger under control, and that image was powerful enough to survive long after the games ended, long after the empire changed, long after the voices disappeared from the stone seats. But for the men who lived it, there was no distant legacy yet. There was only the day's heat. The gate, the sand, the crowd, the opponent, the decision, the wound, the hope of leaving alive, and if fortune allowed him to return below, if the gate closed behind him and the noise became muffled again, the gladiator stepped back into the hidden world that made the visible one possible. The armor came off. The wounds were examined, the body shook after danger passed. A victory might bring praise, money, or reputation. A defeat survived might bring relief mixed with shame. A friend might be missing. A rival might be dead. A name might be shouted in the streets by evening. Then the rhythm began again. Train, wait, fight, heal, be remembered, be summoned again. The Colosseum could make the gladiator famous, but it could not make him free from the cycle that sustained it. And Rome, seated above him in ordered rows, continued to ask for the same thing it had always asked from the arena. Courage it could watch from a distance, danger it could survive through another man, and proof that even death could be brought inside the walls of Roman order. And behind that public proof, behind the roar and the stone, there was still the quieter daily life of the men who made the spectacle possible. The life of a gladiator was not lived only in the arena. In fact, most of it was lived away from the crowd, inside the narrow world of the training school, where days could pass with little glory and much repetition. The public remembered the raised sword, the turning body, the fall into sand, the appeal for mercy. But the fighter himself lived through mornings, meals, bruises, boredom, fear, healing, small friendships, discipline, and the strange waiting that filled the spaces between appearances. To understand gladiators as human beings, we have to step away from the seats of the amphitheater and walk back into the ludus. There the air was different, no grand arches, no emperor watching, no crowd deciding the mood of the day. Only the enclosed rhythm of men being prepared for danger. A gladiator might wake in a small room, perhaps shared, perhaps watched, perhaps secured in a way that reminded him he did not fully own his own movement. The body woke before the mind. Old injuries announced themselves first. A shoulder stiff from shield practice. A scar pulling at the skin. A bruise not yet faded. A cut that had closed but still burned when stretched. The heavy tiredness that comes not from one dramatic event but from many days of controlled strain. Then the routine began again: food, training, correction, rest, more training, inspection, waiting. The day did not need to be dramatic to be hard. The hardness came from repetition and from the knowledge of why the repetition existed. Every ordinary movement pointed toward the arena. The meal was not only a meal. It was fuel for combat. The practice weapon was not only a wooden object, it was preparation for steel. The instructor's criticism was not merely discipline. It might one day be the difference between a man who lived and a man who fell. In a gladiator school, ordinary life was never completely ordinary. Even rest had purpose. A man rested because he needed to be useful again. A wound was treated because the body might still have value. A meal was given because strength had to be maintained. A skill was corrected because failure could cost money, reputation, and life. The gladiator's body stood at the center of this system, and almost everything around him existed to shape, preserve, and risk that body. Food was one of the clearest examples. Ancient writers sometimes referred to gladiators in ways that suggest a heavy grain-based diet. Modern research has also supported the idea that gladiators may often have eaten foods rich in barley, beans, and other plant-based staples, though diet would have varied by place, period, status, and school. We should not imagine every gladiator eating the same meal in every Roman city. But the general logic is easy to understand. Gladiators needed mass, endurance, and recoverable strength. Their bodies had to survive training and, if possible, survive wounds. The food of the ludus may not have looked heroic, it may have been simple, heavy, and repetitive, but it mattered. A body with enough weight could absorb punishment more easily than a starved body. A man fed regularly could train harder. A fighter who could recover might appear again. The school was not feeding him out of tenderness alone. It was maintaining a costly instrument, yet the effect on the man was still real. Compared with some forms of ancient poverty, regular food in a gladiator school might have seemed almost secure, especially to someone who had known hunger before. This is one reason the arena could attract voluntary fighters, however dangerous that choice was. A desperate free man might look at the ludus and see shame, risk, and confinement, but also food, structure, and the faint possibility of reward. Ancient poverty could be brutal. Debt could trap a man. Social failure could leave few paths open. The arena was a terrible bargain, but it was still a bargain some accepted. They sold their safety because safety outside the arena had already become uncertain. That does not make the system kind. It makes the choices more human. People do not always choose between good and bad. Sometimes they choose between two dangers, and history remembers only the more dramatic one. For enslaved gladiators, prisoners, and condemned men, the choice was often no choice at all. The school became a world imposed upon them. But even there, daily life was not a single note of suffering. Human beings adapt to harsh environments by creating patterns, attachments, habits, jokes, rivalries, and private meanings. The ludus may have been a place of coercion, but it was also a place where men learned one another's rhythms. One fighter might always rise slowly. Another might sharpen his focus in silence. Another might talk too much before a dangerous day. Another might laugh at fear because he could not bear to name it. Another might pray. Another might stare at his hands as though they belonged to someone else. In such places, character reveals itself not only in battle but in waiting. The waiting may have been one of the deepest psychological burdens of gladiatorial life. A soldier in war faces danger, but often in campaigns shaped by movement, orders, weather, and uncertainty. A gladiator might face danger according to a scheduled event. He could know that a festival was approaching. He could hear rumors of which fighters would be selected. He could see armor being prepared. He could sense the school's mood changing. The date could come closer like a shadow moving across a wall. This kind of fear is slow. It gives the imagination too much time. A man might wonder who he would face, whether the crowd would favor him, whether his arm had fully healed, whether an old injury would fail him, whether the sponsor was known for mercy, whether the opponent was reckless, careful, cruel, frightened, famous, or hungry to prove himself, whether the day would end with return, injury, freedom, or silence. Then after the fight, if he survived, a different waiting began, waiting for wounds to close, waiting for pain to fade, waiting to learn whether his reputation had grown, waiting for the next call. The life moved in circles. It is tempting to imagine gladiators only as men rushing from combat to combat, but the more haunting reality is the repetition of preparation and recovery. The arena was the bright point. The ludus was the long shadow around it. Medicine lived in that shadow. Roman medical knowledge was practical, varied, and shaped by experience with soldiers, athletes, workers, enslaved people, and injured bodies of many kinds. Gladiator schools had strong reasons to care for wounds. A trained fighter was not easily replaced. A man who survived a fight but died later from infection represented lost investment. A man who healed well could appear again. So surgeons and healers attached to these environments likely developed familiarity with cuts, fractures, dislocations, bruising, and trauma. Again, the motive was mixed. Care and exploitation stood beside each other. A gladiator might receive treatment better than many poor free people, not because society valued him more as a person, but because his body had economic value. The school could be cruel and attentive at the same time. It could bind a man and heal him, feed him and endanger him, train him carefully and send him into the sand. This mixture is uncomfortable because it refuses simple categories. History often does that. It shows us systems that are not careless but still brutal. The gladiators' wounds were not only physical, fame itself left marks. A successful fighter could become a known figure in Roman popular culture. His name might be spoken in taverns, scratched into walls, celebrated in images, remembered by fans. Some gladiators became objects of sexual fascination. Their bodies represented danger, strength, and forbidden closeness to death. To people safely seated in the crowd, the gladiator could seem intensely alive precisely because he lived so near the possibility of not living at all. This fascination crossed social boundaries in ways that troubled Roman moralists. Elite writers sometimes complained about the corrupting attraction of performers, actors, charioteers, and gladiators. The problem was not only entertainment, it was status confusion. A man legally marked by infamy could become emotionally powerful. A person society officially despised could occupy private fantasies. A body that should have been low could become desirable, even glamorous. The arena created fame that Roman morality did not fully know how to handle. This is why the gladiator was both celebrated and stained. He was a hero without honor. A celebrity without respectability, a symbol of courage without full dignity. The crowd might chant for him, but polite society still placed him below the honorable citizen. His fame was real yet unstable. It could not protect him from shame, it could not guarantee freedom, it could not erase ownership, contract, or legal degradation. It could make him visible, but visibility is not the same as safety. Still, for the man himself, fame could matter. A known gladiator might receive gifts. He might attract admiration. He might have a better chance of mercy if defeated bravely. He might be valued more by his owner. He might gain leverage, however limited, within the school. He might imagine that each victory moved him closer to the wooden sword of release. Human beings live not only by conditions, but by the meanings they can build inside them. For a gladiator, reputation could become one of those meanings. A man who had lost his old place in the world could create a new identity in the arena. He could be known for endurance, for elegance, for ferocity, for calm, for a particular victory, for surviving wounds that should have ended him. The crowd's memory might become a substitute for the family memory he had lost. But crowd memory was fragile. It loved the present. A newer fighter could replace an older favorite. One poor performance could damage admiration. A wound could end a career. Death could turn fame into a few words on stone, if even that. The gladiator lived inside a public imagination that could lift him and consume him at the same time. Inside the ludus, the meaning of fame may have been more practical. A famous fighter was valuable. He might be matched carefully. He might be protected from wasteful contests. He might receive better treatment because he brought crowds. But fame could also increase pressure. A sponsor might request him, the public might demand him, his name might be too useful to leave resting. A man could become trapped by his own success. This is one of the quiet cruelties of the gladiator's world. Survival could make him more likely to be risked again. Skill could make him more marketable. Public love could make him harder to hide. The more he became a person to the crowd, the more the crowd wanted to see him placed again at the edge of death. And each time the body remembered, scars accumulated, fingers stiffened, knees weakened, shoulders carried old impacts. The mind learned caution, but the crowd loved courage. A veteran gladiator knew too much. He knew how quickly fortune could change. He knew that young men could be dangerous because they had not yet learned fear fully. He knew that age, even in a strong body, slowly takes small things first: speed, recovery, flexibility, trust in the joints. A veteran in the arena was not only fighting an opponent, he was fighting time. The daily life of such a man might carry a different emotional weight than that of a newcomer. The new fighter feared the unknown. The veteran feared what he knew. He had heard the crowd change mood. He had seen wounds turn bad. He had watched men who seemed unbeatable fall to chance. He had perhaps received mercy once and understood that mercy was not a law of nature. Experience gave skill, but it also gave memory, and memory can be heavy. The gladiator school held these different stages of life together. New men learning how to stand, trained men building reputation, veterans measuring what remained. Injured men healing, former fighters instructing, guards watching. The school was not one single emotional world, but many worlds crowded together. There would have been hierarchy among the gladiators themselves. Not all men were equal inside the ludus. Skill, experience, reputation, fighting type, and relationship with trainers could all shape status. A famous fighter might be treated differently from a raw recruit. A man who brought profit might be protected more than a disposable body. A condemned criminal sent for execution did not share the same future as a trained professional fighter who might appear repeatedly. The word gladiator itself can hide many differences. Some were carefully trained performers of combat. Some were prisoners forced toward death. Some were criminals used in spectacles of punishment. Some were volunteers chasing money or fame. Some were enslaved men whose bodies were turned into public danger. To speak of the gladiator is useful, but we should remember that the arena gathered many human paths into one visible space. Their daily lives could differ sharply. A valuable fighter might have better food, more careful medical attention, perhaps more chances to survive. A condemned man might have almost none of these protections. A novice might be replaceable. A champion might be an investment. A volunteer might carry a different legal story from an enslaved captive. Though once sworn into the arena's discipline, his body too became subject to harsh control. The school classified people because Rome classified everything. Status followed a man even into spectacle. Yet in the sand, status could blur for a moment. A man of low origin could defeat a better-known fighter. A captive could become famous. A volunteer could die in disgrace. A slave could display courage that free men admired. The arena did not abolish hierarchy, but it allowed unexpected reversals within a controlled frame. That unpredictability made it addictive. The crowd came partly because no one knew exactly what would happen. Training shaped the fight. Rules framed the fight. Pairings guided the fight, but the outcomes still trembled. In the daily world of the ludus, the men carried that trembling future inside them. They did ordinary things under extraordinary pressure. They ate, washed, trained, slept, spoke, waited, laughed perhaps because even in harsh places people laugh, feared because fear is honest, dreamed because the mind needs somewhere to go when the body is enclosed. What did a gladiator dream of? We cannot know in any exact way, but we can imagine the kinds of dreams the conditions allowed. Freedom, a return home, money, applause, a woman or man who admired him, a quiet farm, a tavern, a room without locks, the wooden sword, revenge, forgetting, a future where no one shouted while he bled. Some dreams were possible, some were not, some may have changed after the first fight. A man who survived the arena once might no longer dream like the man he had been before. The first appearance could transform him. Before it, fear belonged to imagination. After it, fear had details. He knew the sound of the gate, the brightness of the open sand, the way the crowd became both many people and one creature, the feeling of the weapon in a hand that must not shake. The first contact with the opponent, the moment when training either arrived or abandoned him. After that, he could never again be new. The first fight gave him knowledge. Knowledge could save him. It could also haunt him. This is why daily life after survival mattered. A man returned changed, but the school absorbed that change into routine. He may have wanted silence, but training would resume. He may have wanted to grieve a man who died, but the system moved forward. He may have been praised, but praise led toward the next risk. The ludus did not stop because one fighter had crossed a private threshold. Institutions are often cruel in this way. They continue. The individual experiences a life-altering moment and the system calls it Tuesday. Yet within that continuation, small rituals of meaning may have existed. A fighter might mark a victory, others might respect him differently. He might receive money, a palm branch, a token, a better position, a new reputation. Names and records mattered. The gladiator's life could be counted in appearances and outcomes, but behind those numbers were days of pain and relief. A victory did not mean peace, it meant postponement. A defeat survived did not mean failure only. It meant the crowd or sponsor had allowed life to continue. Even mercy had its burden. A spared man owed his next breath to public judgment. He returned to the school alive because others had decided he deserved to remain useful, admired, or interesting. That knowledge could be humiliating and precious at the same time. To live because the crowd spared you is still to live, but it is not the same as being free. Freedom remained the distant horizon. The rudis, the wooden sword given to a gladiator released from compulsory fighting, carried enormous symbolic weight. Its meaning was beautifully simple: a weapon that was not meant to kill, a sword without steel, a sign that the man no longer had to stand in the arena because someone else ordered it. For a gladiator, such an object could gather years of longing. It represented mornings that did not begin under the same command. It represented old wounds becoming history rather than preparation. It represented a body returned, at least partly, to itself. It represented the possibility of being remembered not only as a performer of danger, but as a survivor of it. But even freedom after the arena was complicated. The stigma of gladiatorial life did not vanish. Former gladiators might remain socially marked. Some became trainers, bodyguards, or continued in related roles. Their skills were specialized, their reputations dangerous, their bodies scarred. A man who had spent years inside the arena's discipline might not easily become ordinary. The world outside could be quieter, but also uncertain. What does a man do when the thing that nearly killed him is also the thing that made him known? What does he become when the crowd no longer calls his name? For some, freedom may have been peace. For others, it may have been emptiness. History does not preserve enough individual stories to answer fully, but the question itself reveals the depth of the gladiator's condition. The arena did not only threaten life, it shaped identity so strongly that leaving it could become another kind of trial. Inside the school, men nearing freedom may have carried themselves differently, perhaps with caution, not wanting to lose everything in one final mistake, perhaps with pride, perhaps with disbelief. A man who had survived many fights might become superstitious, careful with signs, attentive to omens, gods, dreams, and small rituals before combat. Religion and superstition would have had a place in such a life. The Roman world was full of divine presence, household gods, public gods, foreign gods, charms, curses, offerings, and signs. Men facing death rarely live in a purely practical universe. A gladiator might pray to a god of strength, fate, fortune, vengeance, healing, or home. He might carry a charm if allowed. He might interpret a dream. He might curse an opponent. He might seek protection from forces beyond the school's walls. When the body is exposed, the invisible world becomes important. The crowd above might see only combat. The fighter might feel surrounded by gods, ghosts, luck, memory, and fear. This spiritual dimension should not be over-romanticized, but it should not be ignored. Ancient people did not divide the world exactly as modern people often do. Public games could have religious associations. Festivals honored gods. Ritual and spectacle intertwined. The arena existed in a world where death, fate, divinity, and public life touched constantly. A gladiator did not stand in a spiritually empty space. He stood in Rome, and Rome was crowded with gods, yet the most immediate gods in the arena may have seemed to be fortune and the crowd. Fortune decided what training could not. The crowd influenced what law and money allowed. A fighter could do everything right and still be caught. He could lose and still be spared. He could fight beautifully and be wounded badly. He could survive by skill, luck, mercy, or some mixture he would never fully understand. This uncertainty gave daily life its edge. Nothing was secure, not fame, not health, not favor, not freedom. And still men lived. They learned small comforts, the feel of shade after training. The taste of water, the relief when a wound began to close cleanly. The rare laugh shared with another fighter, the pride of mastering a movement, the warmth of being admired, the quiet after a dangerous day, the almost unbelievable sweetness of waking after a night when one had expected not to survive. These small human things matter because they keep the gladiator from becoming only a symbol. Rome turned him into spectacle. History often turns him into image. But he was also a person moving through days. He had a body that hurt, a mind that waited, a memory that reached backward, and a future that could narrow suddenly to the point of a sword. The daily life of gladiators was therefore a life of tension between care and danger, fame and shame, discipline and fear, ordinary routine and extraordinary risk. They ate to be strong enough for the arena. They trained to survive what training also prepared them to face. They were healed so they could be endangered again. They were admired by people who accepted the system that threatened them. They became known through a form of life that could end them at any moment. There is no easy way to soften that. But there is a way to understand it calmly. The gladiator lived at the center of Rome's deepest contradictions. A civilization that praised courage forced dishonored men to display it. A culture that valued discipline turned trained violence into pleasure. A society that organized law and citizenship also made public entertainment from bodies denied full protection. An empire that built roads, baths, and aqueducts also built arenas where men became instruments of emotion. And inside that contradiction, the gladiator built whatever life he could. A routine, a reputation, a friendship, a hope, a fighting style, a prayer, a way of standing, a memory of home, a dream of the wooden sword. Perhaps this is why the story still holds us. Not because the arena was glorious, but because the men inside it were forced to make meaning under conditions that should have stripped meaning away. They were not saints, they were not all heroes, they were not simple victims. They were human beings inside a machine of power, and their daily lives remind us that history is not only made by emperors, generals, and laws. It is also made by bodies waking in the morning, carrying pain, repeating difficult movements, and hoping to survive one more day. As Rome's games grew larger, the quiet life of the ludus remained the hidden root of everything the crowd saw. The amphitheater could roar only because the school had prepared men to walk into it. The emperor could give spectacle only because someone had trained bodies to perform danger. The crowd could judge courage only because the gladiator had spent long days learning how to show it. And yet not every man accepted the system quietly. Some endured, some adapted, some became famous, some died. And some, when the pressure of Roman control became unbearable, turned the discipline of the gladiator against Rome itself. And the most famous of those men was Spartacus. His name has survived so strongly that it can almost feel separate from the world that made him. But Spartacus did not begin as a legend. He began, as far as the ancient sources allow us to see, as a man caught inside Roman power. Later writers remembered him as Thracian or connected him with Thrace, a land on the edge of the Greek and Roman imagination. Associated with warriors, mountains, hard lives, and peoples Rome often treated as foreign and dangerous. The exact details of his early life are uncertain, and we should be careful not to pretend we know more than the evidence gives us. But the shape of his story is clear enough. He was drawn into the Roman system. He ended up in a gladiator school at Capua, and from that enclosed place he became the center of one of the greatest slave uprisings Rome ever faced. Capua was not Rome, but it was deeply connected to Roman wealth, training, and spectacle. A gladiator school, there was not simply a dramatic backdrop, it was part of the real infrastructure of the games. Men were kept, trained, watched, and prepared. Some were dangerous because Rome had made them dangerous. Some had military experience. Some were strong. Some were desperate. Some had nothing left to lose except the life Rome had already claimed. That is one of the hidden risks of any system built on coercion. It trains the body it fears. Rome created gladiators to be controlled fighters, but control is never perfect. A man trained to endure pain, handle weapons, understand fear, and move with discipline does not stop being dangerous when the gate is locked. The school could bind him, punish him, and watch him, but it could not completely erase the human will to escape. The uprising associated with Spartacus began when a group of gladiators broke out of their school. Ancient accounts vary in detail, but the core image is powerful. Men prepared for the arena refused to remain inside the role Rome had written for them. They seized whatever weapons they could, fled, and began gathering others. What might have seemed at first like a local escape became something much larger, because the Roman world was full of people with reasons to hate the chains placed upon them. Enslaved workers, rural laborers, herders, prisoners, people torn from homes by war, men and women with no legal power over their own bodies. The gladiators did not invent Roman slavery. They exposed its danger. Rome's economy and household life depended heavily on enslaved labor. Enslaved people worked in homes, fields, mines, workshops, farms, and estates. Some lived in conditions less brutal than others, but none truly owned themselves. A skilled household slave might live differently from a chained laborer in the countryside. A literate Greek tutor and a field worker did not share the same daily experience. But the legal reality beneath them was severe. The enslaved body could be bought, sold, punished, separated, and used. The gladiator was one visible form of this larger system. Spartacus became terrifying to Rome not only because he escaped, but because his escape spread into a wider revolt among the enslaved and dispossessed. His army grew, it defeated Roman forces, it moved through Italy, it survived longer than Rome expected. And with every victory, the story became more humiliating for the Republic. Rome was used to imagining itself as master. Now men it considered property were defeating Roman armies. This was not only a military problem, it was a psychological wound. The Romans could respect foreign enemies. They had fought Carthage, Greek kings, Celtic warriors, Iberian fighters, and many others. A foreign army could be dangerous and still fit Roman ideas of war, but an army of slaves was different. It threatened the order of the household, the estate, the legal system, and the deep assumption that some people were born or reduced to obedience. A slave revolt turned Rome's private violence outward. It said that the danger inside the system had always been there. Spartacus and those who followed him were not merely running from one school. They became, for a time, a moving challenge to Roman control. Ancient sources describe moments of surprising discipline and leadership among the rebels. Spartacus appears not as a simple brute but as a capable commander, though the details are shaped by writers looking back through Roman fear, admiration, and moral judgment. The revolt moved across landscapes far from the polished memory of the Colosseum. Hills, roads, camps, rural estates, mountain passes, fields where enslaved workers may have looked up and heard that men like themselves were fighting Rome. For the rebels, the world must have felt both open and dangerous. Escape from the school did not mean safety. Every mile required food, weapons, decisions, trust, and movement. A growing force is difficult to control. People join with different hopes. Some want freedom, some want revenge, some want plunder, some want to go home. Some want to keep fighting because fighting has become the only life left. Spartacus had to lead not a clean army of one purpose but a desperate human mass moving under pressure. That kind of leadership is fragile. The Romans, meanwhile, could not allow the revolt to become normal. The longer it lasted, the more it suggested weakness. Local defeats were humiliating, panic spread. The Senate had to respond with greater force. Eventually, command passed to Marcus Licinius Crassus, a wealthy and ambitious Roman who understood that crushing Spartacus could bring enormous prestige. Crassus did not face only fighters, he faced a symbol, and Rome often answered symbols with severity. The final struggle against Spartacus was brutal. The rebel force was eventually trapped and defeated. Spartacus himself is said to have died in battle, though his body was not clearly identified. After the revolt was crushed, thousands of captured rebels were crucified along the road, displayed as a warning. This punishment was not only execution, it was communication. Rome wanted everyone who passed that road to understand what happened to those who rose against the order of masters. The body became a message again, as it had in the arena, as it had in public punishment, as it had in triumph. Rome ruled not only through law but through visibility. The crucified rebels along the Appian Way stood outside the arena, but they belonged to the same wider Roman language of power. Public suffering warned the living. It told enslaved people what rebellion could cost. It told citizens that Rome had restored order, It told rivals that the Republic, however shaken, could still punish at scale. Spartacus failed in the immediate sense. The revolt was crushed, Rome survived, slavery continued, the games continued, the schools continued, but history is not only measured by immediate victory. Spartacus survived in memory because his revolt revealed the fear beneath Roman confidence. He showed that the men Rome trained for spectacle could become soldiers against it. He showed that a system built on human domination had cracks. He showed that beneath the order of estates, households, schools, and arenas lay a pressure that could erupt. The gladiator, in his case, stopped being Rome's entertainment and became Rome's nightmare. Yet Spartacus was not the whole story of resistance. Most gladiators did not lead revolts. Most enslaved people could not escape. Many resisted in smaller, quieter ways that history barely records. Slowing work, hiding things, preserving memory, forming attachments, refusing inwardly to become what the system named them. Ancient records often notice resistance only when it becomes dangerous to elites, but human resistance exists long before it becomes visible to power. This matters because the arena can make us think only in dramatic extremes. Victory or death, crowd or silence, escape or captivity. But the real lives of gladiators and enslaved people were filled with smaller acts of endurance. A man survived training. A woman protected a child. A worker remembered a homeland. A fighter saved strength. A wounded man healed. A person under domination still carried an inner life Rome could not fully own. The gladiators' rebellion, whether open like Spartacus or quiet like endurance, reminds us that the arena was never just a Roman fantasy. It involved real people who did not always accept the meanings placed upon them. Rome tried to define the gladiator as property, as performer, as danger, as dishonor, as spectacle. But a human being is never only what a system calls him. This truth made the gladiator powerful and unsettling. The same qualities Rome admired in the arena could become dangerous outside it. Courage, endurance, discipline, physical skill, contempt for pain, loyalty between fighters, knowledge of weapons, all could serve spectacle, but all could also serve revolt. The line between entertainment and threat was thinner than Rome wanted to admit. That thin line also helps explain the moral criticism surrounding the games. Not every Roman looked at the arena with simple approval. Some writers and thinkers were troubled by the cruelty, the crowd's appetite, the moral effect of watching violence, or the way public killing shaped the soul. Criticism did not end the games, but it existed. The Roman world was not morally uniform. People argued, judged, admired, condemned, and rationalized. Some defended the games as tradition. Some saw them as training in courage. Some viewed executions as justice. Some enjoyed them without reflection. Some worried that spectators became worse by watching. The arena invited moral unease because it was built from contradiction. It showed courage but under coercion. It displayed discipline but for public pleasure. It punished criminals but also entertained the crowd with their suffering. It honored tradition but could feed cruelty. It gave the people a shared event but at the cost of those who stood below them. One of the most disturbing features of the arena was not only that violence happened there. It was that violence became ordinary. A person could wake in the morning, attend the games, watch men and animals die, discuss the spectacle, return home and continue life. The extraordinary became scheduled. The terrible became social. The sight of suffering became part of urban routine. This is how societies become hardened, not always through sudden evil, sometimes through repetition. The first time a person sees cruelty, he may be shocked. The 10th time less so. The 100th time he may complain only if the performance is dull. The arena's danger was not only to the gladiator's body, it was also to the spectator's inner life. To watch pain as entertainment changes the watcher. Roman moralists understood this, at least some of them did. They worried that the crowd's appetite could grow, that pity could weaken, that the line between justice and pleasure could blur, that people might come to enjoy not courage but suffering itself. The games trained spectators too. They train them to look, to judge, to shout, to demand, to accept, to want more. This does not mean every spectator was cruel in the same way. A crowd is made of many people. Some may have been thrilled, some horrified, some bored, some sympathetic, some eager for mercy, some hungry for death, some attending because the city attended, some watching because public life left little room not to watch. But the institution itself created a shared habit of gazing at exposed bodies. The gladiator stood beneath that gaze. He knew it could save him. He knew it could condemn him. The crowd's moral role was therefore complicated. It was not only passive. When a defeated fighter appealed, the crowd could express feeling. They could admire bravery and ask for life. They could reject cowardice and desire death. Their voice mattered, though final authority belonged to the sponsor or ruler. This gave ordinary people a taste of judgment, a feeling that their collective emotion had power over life. That feeling can be intoxicating. To sit in a crowd and help decide another person's fate is a dangerous pleasure. The arena offered that pleasure. Rome wrapped it in tradition and order, but the emotional core remained powerful. A kneeling man, a raised hand, the crowd roaring, the decision delayed for a breath. In that moment, thousands of spectators leaned into the same question: should he live? For the gladiator, the question was not abstract, it was breath, it was mourning. It was whether pain would continue into healing or end in final darkness. The cruelty of that moment was sharpened by its intimacy. The crowd might not know the fighter's childhood, language, mother, fears, or dreams, but it could decide his future. It could feel close to him without truly knowing him. It could turn his life into a public emotion. That is one of the oldest patterns of spectacle. People feel connection to a person they do not fully recognize as equal. The gladiator's fame depended on that unstable connection. The law also reflected his degraded position. Gladiators belonged to categories marked by infamy. Their public use of the body placed them outside full honor. Even those who volunteered entered a kind of disgrace. The Roman citizen ideal valued self-command, household authority, military service, and public dignity. To sell one's body for display and danger was seen as shameful, even if the display itself thrilled the crowd. This contradiction did not trouble Rome enough to end the system. Instead, Rome managed it. It admired gladiators as performers of courage while keeping them socially low. It allowed desire while maintaining contempt. It used their bodies while denying them honor. It created rules around their profession but did not grant them full dignity. The gladiator's legal shame made his public fame safer for the elite. He could be celebrated without being equal. That is a hard sentence, but an important one. He could be celebrated without being equal. This pattern appears often in history. Societies may adore performers, fighters, workers, servants, or entertainers whose labor they depend upon while still refusing them respect, security, or power. Admiration becomes a substitute for justice. Applause becomes a way to avoid equality. The Roman gladiator lived inside that pattern in one of its most extreme forms. His courage could be praised, but his person could remain dishonored. The revolt of Spartacus shattered the comfort of that arrangement. It showed what happened when men trained for spectacle refused to remain safely beneath admiration. They stopped being visible only on Roman terms. They moved through Italy on their own terms, at least for a time. They forced Rome to see them not as entertainment, but as a political and military crisis. That is why the memory of Spartacus remains so strong. He exposed the hidden violence beneath the visible violence. The arena's visible violence was controlled. It had rules, schedules, sponsors, seating, and ceremonies, but beneath it was the larger violence of enslavement, conquest, and domination. Spartacus brought that deeper violence into the open. He made the system fight the people it had shaped. Rome eventually won, but the victory did not erase the question. What kind of society creates men like this, then fears them when they refuse to perform? The answer is not simple, and it should not be rushed. Rome was not only cruelty. It was law, language, engineering, family, devotion, administration, literature, religion, trade, and daily life. Created beauty and order as well as suffering, but the arena reminds us that civilization is not the opposite of brutality. Sometimes civilization organizes brutality so carefully that people stop recognizing it as brutality at all. This is why the gladiator belongs inside a serious history of Rome, not as decoration, not as a colorful side topic, but as evidence of Roman courage, Roman hierarchy, Roman discipline, Roman cruelty, Roman politics, Roman crowd life. Roman fear, Roman memory. The moral criticism of the games grew more important over time, especially as religious and philosophical attitudes shifted. But even before the rise of Christian opposition, unease existed. Some thinkers looked at the games and saw not noble courage but spiritual damage. They saw spectators becoming hungry for wounds, they saw punishment turning into pleasure, they saw public death shaping private character. The games could be defended, but they could also be condemned, and that debate became part of Rome's changing soul. For many centuries, however, the arena remained strong. It answered too many needs at once. It entertained the people, it displayed power, it punished enemies and criminals, it created fame, it honored tradition, it gave emperors a stage. It gave cities identity. It gave the crowd a shared emotional life. It allowed Rome to see itself as master of danger. Institutions that serve many needs do not disappear easily. Even when criticized, they endure. Even when morally troubling, they become familiar. Even when expensive, they become expected. The gladiatorial games survived because they were woven into the fabric of Roman public life. To remove them would require more than a change in taste. It would require a change in what Rome believed public power should look like. That change would come slowly. Not in 1 year, not through one critic, not because Rome suddenly became gentle. It would come through shifts in religion, economy, political structure, imperial priorities, civic identity, and moral imagination. The old world of the games would not vanish at once. It would weaken, transform, lose support, face restriction, and eventually become memory. But before that decline, the arena continued to stand. Men continued to train. Crowds continued to gather. Sponsors continued to give. The wounded continued to be treated. The famous continued to be cheered. The defeated continued to look upward. The moral contradiction remained unresolved, and perhaps many Romans did not want it resolved, because the arena gave them something powerful, a place where fear could be watched, ordered, judged, and survived from a distance. It allowed them to feel close to death without dying. It allowed them to witness courage without risking their own bodies. It allowed them to believe that Rome could control even the most frightening human realities: violence, pain, fate, rebellion, and mortality. But Spartacus had already shown that control was never complete. The man trained for the arena could become the man who broke its walls. The enslaved body could become an army. The spectacle could become a warning not only to slaves but to Rome itself. And after the revolt was crushed, after the roads grew quiet again, after the crucified bodies became memory, the games continued. That may be the most sobering detail of all. Rome absorbed the shock, it punished the rebels, it restored order. Then, in time, it returned to the arena. The machine had been threatened, but it had not yet stopped. For the gladiator still inside that machine, Spartacus may have been legend, danger, inspiration, or warning. Perhaps some heard his name whispered with admiration. Perhaps others feared that any memory of revolt would bring harsher discipline. Perhaps instructors used the story to remind men that escape ended on crosses. Perhaps hidden in some hearts, the story remained a small ember, proof that Rome could be frightened. We cannot know, but we can feel the weight of the possibility. In every training yard after Spartacus, Rome had to remember that gladiators were not merely bodies for display. They were men trained in violence, living under pressure, carrying human desires Rome could punish but not erase. The school might be locked, the weapons might be guarded, the routines might be controlled. But the memory of revolt remained part of the shadow of the ludus. And so the Gladiators' story enters a darker and deeper phase. Not only the spectacle of combat, not only the fame of the arena, but the question of what such games did to Rome itself, to the rulers who gave them, to the crowds who watched them, to the men who fought in them, to the moral imagination of an empire that could look at courage and suffering in the same body and call it a gift to the people. The arena had reached the height of its power, but every institution, even one built of stone, begins one day to age. And slowly across the changing centuries of the Roman world, the games that had once seemed eternal would begin to lose the world that sustained them. Something immense and troubling had once happened there. And that is why the legacy of Roman gladiators is not only found in books, mosaics, broken inscriptions, or the great stone shell of the Colosseum. It is found in the uneasy feeling that rises when we stand before the ruins and realize that the past was not simple. Rome was capable of astonishing order, law, engineering, poetry, administration, roads, aqueducts, cities, and memory. Yet it was also capable of turning human danger into public pleasure, arranging suffering with discipline, and making a man's fear into a gift for the crowd. The gladiator remains powerful because he carries both truths at once. He does not allow Rome to be only glorious. He does not allow Rome to be only cruel. He stands between admiration and discomfort, between courage and exploitation, between the beauty of discipline and the darkness of domination. He reminds us that civilizations are not judged only by what they build, but also by what they are willing to watch. Long after the games ended, the image of the gladiator remained. The helmet, the shield, the sword. The net, the trident, the sand, the raised hand, the face hidden behind bronze, the crowd above him waiting. These images survived because they are simple enough to remember but deep enough to trouble us. A Roman senator might have seen in the gladiator a lesson in courage, a crowd member might have seen excitement, a Lannister might have seen profit, an emperor might have seen political power, a moral critic might have seen corruption, a fellow fighter might have seen a friend, rival, warning, or mirror. A modern viewer sees all of these at once, and perhaps that is why the gladiator never quite disappears. He is too full of contradiction. The ruins of the arena deepen that feeling. A ruin is not silent because nothing happened there. It is silent because everything that happened there has passed beyond recovery. The voices are gone, the animals are gone, the officials are gone, the sellers of food and drink are gone, the gamblers are gone, the boys imitating fighters in the streets are gone, the emperor's gesture is gone, the wounded men are gone, the dust has settled for centuries, but the structure remains. Stone holds memory differently from writing. Writing explains, stone only endures. A broken arch does not tell us what to think. It simply stands there, asking us to imagine what filled the emptiness. The Colosseum today is one of the most famous monuments on Earth, but fame can make a place harder to see. Millions know its shape before they know its story. It appears on postcards, films, travel posters, history books, coins, and screens. It has become so familiar that its strangeness can almost vanish. But if we slow down, if we remove the noise around the image, the building becomes strange again. A vast structure built so that thousands could watch a few. A masterpiece of architecture organized around exposure. A public gift that also displayed death. A monument of Roman skill and Roman appetite. To stand inside such a place, even only in imagination, is to feel the distance between admiration and judgment. We can admire the engineering without admiring the purpose. We can study the history without softening the violence. We can recognize the courage of gladiators without pretending the system that used them was noble. This balance is important. The gladiator should not be romanticized into a clean hero of the arena. Many were forced into combat, many lived under shame, discipline, and control. Many died anonymously. Even those who became famous did so inside a system that fed on risk, but he should not be reduced only to victimhood either. Within harsh conditions, gladiators developed skill, identity, pride, discipline, reputation, and sometimes freedom. They were human beings, not symbols alone. History becomes more honest when it refuses easy categories. The gladiator was not only a man with a sword, he was a worker in a violent profession, a body under Roman law, a performer of courage, a product of conquest, a possible celebrity, a possible slave, a possible volunteer, a possible condemned criminal, a possible survivor, a man with wounds, meals, memories, fears, and hopes. This fuller image matters because it brings history back down from marble and empire into the human body. Rome's laws were written by elites, its monuments built by laborers, its wars commanded by generals, its emperors remembered by name. But the arena shows us another kind of historical truth, the ordinary body placed under extraordinary pressure. The gladiator's body was where politics became visible, where the crowd's appetite became physical, where Rome's hierarchy became flesh, where courage was tested in public, where power decided whether mercy would appear. In that sense, the gladiator was one of Rome's most honest symbols. He showed what the empire was willing to do and what it wanted to believe about itself while doing it. Rome wanted to believe in discipline, so the gladiator displayed discipline. Rome wanted to believe in courage, so the gladiator displayed courage. Rome wanted to believe in control over death, so death was staged inside rules. Rome wanted to believe in mastery over enemies, criminals, slaves, animals, and fear itself, so the arena gathered all of them under one gaze. But beneath these beliefs there was still uncertainty. The fighter might surprise the crowd, the defeated man might win mercy, the famous man might fall, the enslaved man might rebel, the crowd might pity when it was expected to demand death. A system built for control still had moments that control could not fully own. This is one reason the gladiator's legacy feels alive. He stands for power but also for the instability of power. Rome placed him beneath the crowd yet made him unforgettable. Rome degraded him yet preserved his image. Rome used him yet could not fully erase his personhood. Even through fragments, inscriptions, artwork, and ruins, the men beneath the helmets continue to return. They return whenever someone asks what courage means when freedom is absent. They return whenever a crowd cheers for danger from a safe place. They return whenever fame is given to a person without dignity or protection. They return whenever society praises endurance while ignoring the system that made endurance necessary. This is why the gladiator is not only an ancient figure, he is a historical mirror. Not because our world is the same as Rome, it is not. We should be careful with easy comparisons, but human beings still gather to watch risk, pain, competition, humiliation, victory, and defeat. We still turn bodies into entertainment. We still admire people placed under pressure. We still confuse visibility with value. We still sometimes applaud courage without asking why a person had to be so courageous in the first place. The Roman gladiator asks a quiet question across time. What do we become when another person's danger becomes our pleasure? That question does not need a loud answer. It is enough to let it remain in the room. The later memory of gladiators also changed with each age that inherited them. In some periods they were seen as examples of pagan cruelty, proof of the moral darkness from which Christian Rome had turned away. In other periods they became symbols of masculine courage and discipline. In modern stories they often become rebels, heroes, tragic fighters, or men seeking freedom against tyranny. Each version tells us something about Rome, but also something about the age doing the remembering. The historical gladiator is quieter than the legend. He does not always give speeches, he does not always rebel, he does not always win the crowd, he does not always die dramatically. Sometimes he trains, sometimes he waits, sometimes he eats, sometimes he heals, sometimes he fears, sometimes he survives without anyone writing down why. A great part of his life was ordinary time under extraordinary conditions. That is what legends often erase. They love the moment of combat, the final blow, the roar, but real history includes the hours before and after. It includes the awkward, painful, repetitive human parts that do not fit easily into heroic memory. The school before sunrise, the stale ache of old wounds, the instructor's correction. The heavy meal, the silence after a friend is gone, the smell of oil and dust. The hope attached to a wooden sword, the tired body lying awake while the city sleeps. If this story has moved slowly, it is because those details deserve time. The gladiators' world was not only violence. It was the long preparation for violence, the long recovery from violence, and the long shadow violence cast over the self. And when the games finally faded, those daily details disappeared first. The crowd remembered the spectacle, the monuments preserved the structure, the moralists preserved criticism, the historians preserved names and dates, but the quiet routines of the fighters became almost invisible. That is often how history treats the vulnerable. It records them when they become useful to power, frightening to power, or symbolic after death. It records them when they fight, rebel, suffer publicly, or serve a larger story. But the ordinary texture of their lives slips away. We are left with fragments, and we must handle those fragments carefully. A name scratched into stone. A picture on a lamp, a mosaic showing two fighters, a tomb inscription recording victories, a law restricting games, a writer's complaint, a ruin with empty seats. From these pieces we do not recover everything. We recover enough to understand that real people stood behind the image. That is the work of gentle history, not to pretend certainty where the evidence is broken, but to bring attention back to the human scale. The gladiators' legacy also belongs to the wider history of Rome's transformation. The games began in a world of funerary honor, aristocratic competition, military culture, and public display. They grew with Rome's expansion, wealth, and appetite for spectacle. They reached their height under imperial power when emperors could use games to communicate generosity, order, victory, and control. Then they declined as the empire changed, as resources shifted, as Christian moral criticism intensified, and as the older culture of civic spectacle lost some of its authority. In this arc, we can see Rome itself moving, from city to republic, from republic to empire, from conquest to ceremony, from pagan public ritual to Christian imperial identity. From crowded amphitheater to silent ruin. The gladiator walked through that entire transformation, first as ritual fighter, then trained performer, then imperial symbol, then moral problem, then memory. Few figures carry such a long journey inside a single image. This is why the helmet on the sand still speaks. It speaks of the dead honored by blood. It speaks of ambitious families buying public attention. It speaks of prisoners taken in war. It speaks of enslaved bodies trained for spectacle. It speaks of schools where men learned how to survive fear. It speaks of crowds that wanted danger arranged beautifully. It speaks of emperors who understood the politics of generosity. It speaks of moral unease growing slowly in the empire's heart. It speaks of change. It speaks of silence after noise. And perhaps most of all, it speaks of memory's strange mercy. Rome once watched gladiators because they might die. We remember them because they lived, however briefly, inside that danger. We remember not only the victors but the condition itself, the fact that such men existed, that such schools operated, that such crowds gathered, that such buildings rose, that such contradictions were normal to people who also loved their families, prayed to their gods, built homes, wrote poetry, and feared their own deaths. This is one of the hardest lessons of history. Cruelty is often carried out not by monsters but by ordinary societies with explanations. The Romans were not unreal people. They were human beings with customs, fears, ambitions, pleasures, duties, loyalties, and inherited beliefs. Many likely saw the games as normal because the world around them had taught them to see them that way. That does not excuse the suffering, but it helps us understand how powerful culture can be. A society can teach people what to notice, what to ignore, what to praise, and what to accept. The arena was one of Rome's classrooms. It taught hierarchy, it taught courage, it taught punishment, it taught spectatorship, it taught that some bodies could be placed in danger for others to watch. And over time, as beliefs changed, people began to read that lesson differently. What had once been tradition became cruelty. What had once been public generosity became moral embarrassment. What had once been spectacle became ruin. This change did not make later societies pure. But it did prove that moral vision can shift. People can learn to see what earlier generations normalized. The stones remain, but the meaning changes. When we imagine the final echoes of the gladiatorial world, we might picture not one last fight, but a series of fading scenes. An amphitheater where the crowd is smaller than it once was, a training yard with fewer men, a city official calculating costs, a bishop preaching against bloodshed, an old spectator remembering games from youth, a former fighter touching scars that no longer earn applause, a child playing near a wall whose purpose he does not understand, grass beginning to grow in cracks, rain falling through open stone. The arena does not end in thunder, it empties, and emptiness can be more haunting than destruction. Destruction is dramatic, emptiness is patient. It allows the past to withdraw slowly until only shapes remain, a doorway without a procession, a tunnel without footsteps, seats without bodies, sand without fear. The place is still there, but the world that made it breathe has gone. This is the mood that should remain at the end of the gladiator's story. Not excitement, not triumph, not simple condemnation. A quiet understanding. The Roman gladiator belonged to a world very different from ours, but the questions around him are still human. How does power use the vulnerable? How does a crowd become comfortable with suffering? How does fame hide shame? How does courage survive inside coercion? How does a society remember those it once used? The answers are not simple. They are scattered across ruins, across inscriptions, across ancient criticism, across modern imagination, across the silence where the crowd used to be, and perhaps the most honest answer is to hold the contradiction without looking away. The gladiator was brave, but his bravery was often demanded by a brutal system. The games were skillful, but their skill served violence. The Colosseum was magnificent, but magnificence does not erase suffering. Rome was great, but greatness does not make a civilization innocent. To study the gladiator is to study the cost of spectacle. It is also to study endurance. Because beneath all the structures of power there were men who learned to stand, men who faced fear with trained bodies. Men who sometimes showed grace under pressure no human being should have been forced to endure. Men who, for a few moments, held the attention of an empire and made even those above them wait for what they would do next. Some died unknown, some became famous. Some rebelled, some were freed. Some returned to dust without record, but together they left a mark larger than the arena that contained them. Now the arena is quiet, the emperor's seat is empty, the crowd has no voice, the gates no longer open for combat, the hidden rooms beneath the floor no longer prepare men for the sun. The sand has been replaced, removed, imagined, restored and studied. The city has changed around the ruins again and again. The world that built the games has passed through empire, collapse, church, kingdom, war, tourism, scholarship, and memory. Still, the gladiator remains, not as Rome saw him, not as legend alone sees him, but as a human figure standing at the meeting point of courage and cruelty. And when night settles over the old stones, it is possible to imagine the arena not filled with noise but with absence. Moonlight touching the arches, shadows lying where crowds once sat, wind moving through openings where voices once rose, the great circle no longer demanding blood, no longer judging fear, no longer turning death into entertainment. Only stone, only memory, only the knowledge that people once stood there, looked down and watched other people fight for life. And then the image softens. The crowd fades, the swords lower, the dust settles. The men beneath the helmets are no longer performers, no longer property, no longer spectacle. They become what they always were beneath Rome's meanings, human beings carried forward by history because something in their lives still asks to be remembered. If you wish to keep walking through history, another quiet world will be waiting in the next story. But for now, we leave the arena in silence. The torches are gone, the gates are closed, the last footsteps fade beneath the arches. And Rome, which once filled the air with shouting, becomes still enough for sleep.